Chapter 1275. It was a huge beetle-shaped bug. From afar, it looked like a small mountain. Just its bulging back was 5 stories high. This guy used its thick and solid carapace to block all the dwarves' artillery fire and rushed over. 3 dwarf Spitfire tanks bravely went up to meet it. Unfortunately, with a pinch of its huge mouth, one of the Spitfire tanks exploded on the spot, bursting into a small mushroom cloud of flames. The remaining 2 tanks were not spared either. The giant bug used its horns to dig and flip the 2 tanks upside down, and then there was a violent explosion. Krasis frowned deeply. In the absence of the Alliance's commanders, as well as the group of kings, he was the temporary commander of the Alliance Expeditionary Force. He could not bear to watch this scene. However, this kind of existence that exceeded conventional force had to be dealt with by someone strong. However, before he could speak, Sal had already taken a step forward and said in a clear voice, "The Alliance has done enough for this world. Leave this to the tribe's experts." There was no need for Sal to give another order. Rexer had already stepped out. Misha, Rexer, who had ogre blood and infinite strength, made an extremely shocking move. He threw out his pet war bear Misha, which weighed at least a ton. Yes, that's right, he threw it out. It was like a dwarf artillery soldier who had activated Deity descends and picked up a 1-ton mortar shell. However, Lexer was even more relaxed and satisfied. He had tossed away such a big bear just like that. Damn, it even had a spiraling effect. The experienced dwarf artillery soldier could not help but wonder if this Misha also had an armor-piercing or a second explosion function. It was obvious that the old dwarf was thinking too much. Rexer's Misha was very precious. He was not someone who shouted, "Explosions are art," all day long, nor was he a necromancer who lost his mind. How could he let his precious war pet do the work of self-destructing? But throwing out a 1-ton giant bear just like that, weight was indeed lethal. The big worm was dumbfounded by Misha's attack. With Rexer's command, Misha immediately entered a berserk state. Not only was his body suffused with a scarlet bloodlight, but his body also became a full-size bigger. He actually managed to slap that incomparably large bug away with a single palm strike. Following that, Misha roared and pounced forward, his 2 large bare paws striking out continuously. With the shrill cries of the insects as the background music, almost every slap from Misha sent large pieces of the insect's carapace and flesh flying. Seeing this scene, Krasis could not help but nod and ask Sal, "Is this the legendary Beastmaster Hunter?" Not bad. Sal couldn't help but feel proud. The Beastmen had migrated to Kalendor. Apart from not being able to catch up to the Alliance in terms of technology, they had also gained something. For example, in terms of the hunter profession, under the leadership of Lexer and the other hunters, they had developed talents such as Beastmaster Hunter. In terms of the research of professional skills, they had the potential to surpass the Alliance. Unfortunately, there were still too few professionals. The Alliance's artillery fire was still fierce, but no matter how strong the artillery fire was, it was impossible to shoot down all the invading insects. For a small number of insects that had rushed to the front of the formation, it was a bit of a waste to use the Alliance's battle formation to defend. For the Alliance soldiers, wearing full body armor itself required physical strength. Looking at the endless stream of insects, Krasis discussed with Sal and decided that the tribal warriors would go out into the formation to kill the isolated insects, while the Alliance's elven archers and priests would provide support from the back. Occasionally, powerful insects would break in, and naturally, there would be Master Howl, Kane, and other strong warriors to deal with them. The battle lasted for more than 24 hours. Fortunately, the Alliance's military strength was strong, and they used a rotating system, so it was not impossible for them to hold on. At this time, there was a sudden rumble of cannons in the distance. They saw 3 huge flying battleships, sweeping away the clouds and slowly descending from a high altitude where the flying insects could not reach. As they descended, they opened all the cannons exaggeratedly, using the height and parabola to clear the insect colony further away that the heavy cannons of the stronghold could not hit. Almost every cannonball that fell would set off a column of smoke more than 10 meters high. Sand and insect limbs flew everywhere, and the scene was spectacular. The great and invincible figure, the dense and terrible cannons on the side of the ship, and the Alliance flag fluttering in the wind, all stimulated the eyes of the tribal warriors. Whether it was the Alliance or the tribe, all the warriors let out a deafening cheer. Sal's face was a little blue. Fortunately, his face was green, so the Alliance did not look obvious, but Wajin immediately noticed it. Without Sal's command, Wajin turned his hand and grabbed the collar of the goblin boss who joined the tribe, the Prince of Trade, Garavix, the owner of the Rustwater conglomerate. The wise Wajin spoke in the goblin language that very few people could understand. "Do you see that thing in the sky? If we don't want our main city to be threatened by that thing's cannons in the future, the tribe must also have its own flying battleship." It was easier said than done to build a flying battleship of the level of the Heavenbreaker. Looking at the extremely exaggerated design of the 8 propellers, Garavix could feel the technical barriers contained in it. He thought of the sad days when he was threatened by the Alliance with cannons, and was threatened by King Delwyn that if he did not pay taxes, he would not be able to do business. The goblin boss fiercely clenched his teeth. The tribe will have a flying battleship. How long? 3 years. If we can steal the blueprint, it will be a year at most. Duque did not know the dirty thoughts of the several leaders of the tribe. At this moment, in Naxxramas, Duque was chatting with the people around him while dividing the spoils. "Well, as long as there are no accidents, Naxxramas will belong to our alliance. As long as we get on Courage, we can form a joint flying fleet of the alliance and the tribe." Joint flying fleet? Where did the tribe get a flying ship? Elysia was curious. "Technical output, of course," Duque replied casually. Magni was annoyed. "Hey, Duque, although you came up with the idea, the research and practice are all done by us dwarves and gnomes. If you say technical output, then so be it. You should also consider our feelings." Duque chuckled. "What are you so nervous about, old man? When have I ever let the dwarves, gnomes, and even the Alliance suffer losses? I didn't ask you to give the latest Heavenbreaker blueprint to the tribe. Can't you give the tribe some early-stage flying ship blueprints with single-cylinder and twin propellers? If you don't give the new cannons, you can at least give the outdated stuff without rifling. Think about it, if you sell all those dust-eating things in your warehouse, that would be money and ores." Speaking of this, Magni's eyes instantly lit up. "When it comes to doing business, you humans are still the most cunning. But I like it." The two bad guys high-fived each other and then laughed evilly. Chapter 1276. With the 3 original horsemen of the apocalypse leading the way, the treasure chests of the 4 horsemen were not difficult to find. When everyone opened the treasure chests, not to mention the others, even Duque himself was stunned. First of all, a mere group of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse would never have so many items. Duque glanced around and found that the equipment that should have been dropped by the bosses that died due to the Dalajan main cannon bombardment and various other reasons were all here. Seeing the doubts of Duque and the others, Blamu took the initiative to explain, "Most of the chests are equipment that the Scourge army has plundered from all over the world. But the real best items are the Titan-era equipment that has long been in the fortress and has only recently been unearthed." The heroic spirit that was emitting a holy radiance reached into the chest and pulled out a few pieces of equipment. Almost as soon as he saw these pieces of equipment, Duque's pupils suddenly shrank. Sure enough, he was not mistaken. This was the second key to this batch of equipment: quality. After killing Rivendell, the head of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, Duque had obtained a small portion of divinity. The problem was that this divinity was filled with the power of chaos. In a situation where Duque could not produce divinity himself, forcefully using this divinity would only contaminate other divinity and even cause Duque to go insane. This was definitely not worth it. Duque dispersed this chaotic divinity and let it dissipate into the world. However, Duque did not expect that even if it was a portion of divinity that could not be used, because Rivendell had used it for a long time, it had inadvertently increased the quality of the equipment dropped. Lost Victor set, Lost Defender set, and Lost Conqueror set. These were level 80 sets of equipment that completely surpassed Mount Hyjal's level. It was also commonly known as the 7th set, T7, by the players. Except for the head parts of the various sets that were still in Thuzad's hands, the gloves should be outside the obsidian temple. If it were not for the fact that there were too few sets, only 5, the entire team would have changed their equipment. After some discussion, it was decided that Magni, Tyrion, Gavinrad, Servanas, and Jaina would wear it first. Jaina was a little hesitant. After all, they were both mages, and this gorgeous Frostfire set was a greater bonus for Duque. Duque, do you really not want it? Duque shook his head. Putting aside the fact that he should be able to get the head of the suit, just the fact that the Obsidian Temple could not travel through time and space was enough to give Duque a headache. Of course, he couldn't say it out loud. Duque smiled and said, "Silly girl, why are you worried about me? I have a better." Duque stretched out his hand and grasped the air. A mysterious and heaven-defying aura suddenly spread out. Every pair of eyes was fixed on Duque. Ashes to ashes. Dust to dust. I, Duke Marcus, in the name of the successor of interstellar wanderer Medivh, in the name of the new guardian of Azeroth, summon your response. Come out. Atish. It was accompanied by a brief and mysterious call. Dozens of orange wooden fragments flew out of Duque's spatial bag and the horseman's treasure chest, like a jigsaw puzzle or a pile of building blocks. The incomplete fragments assembled themselves in the air. Pala. It was the strange sound of wood colliding with each other. Under everyone's watchful eyes, a dark brown staff with a long handle was completed. Then, there was a soft orange glow. It was incredible. There was no longer a single crack on the staff's handle, which should have been covered in cracks. It was as if it was brand new. Duque took out a staff head that looked like a chicken drumstick and attached it to the staff. Without glue or any binding or repair, the staff head and body automatically fused together perfectly. This is... Jaina murmured in disbelief. Duque scratched his head. Sure enough, the staff's tail is still missing. As soon as Duque said that, everyone suddenly realized that there was a gap at the end of the staff that looked like it had been bitten by a dog. Indeed, the staff's tail was missing. Originally, everyone was wondering if they could see the birth of a divine artifact, but who knew that the staff's tail was still missing? Everyone congratulated Duque, but it seemed like they would feel bad if they didn't say anything. Only Duque himself didn't care. According to the original history, the divine artifact staff, Atish, the legendary staff of the Guardian, would shatter into 42 pieces after killing Sargeras. They were the head, the staff's tail, and the 40 pieces of the staff's body. Because of the existence of a certain transmigrator, the head of Atish's staff had been in Duque's hands from beginning to end. Now that he had unexpectedly obtained the staff's body in advance, it could be said that this divine artifact staff was more than half complete. But the last one was the most difficult because in history, the staff's tail should have been in Thun's hands. When Duque held the staff in one hand, he felt a change in the pulse of fate. It's actually not in Thun's hands? There was a reaction between the various parts of the divine artifact. At this moment, Atish clearly told his new master that his final staff's tail wasn't in on Karaj, but here. That's right. It was in Thuzad's hands. This is really lucky. Duque was very happy, very happy. He even couldn't help but laugh out loud. Ha! Hearty laughter resounded throughout the hall. What's wrong? Jaina secretly pulled on Duque's sleeve. Nothing. I just didn't expect that the last part of the divine artifact Atish would actually be in Thuzad's hands. Duque laughed very happily, and also very presumptuous. Because as long as he killed Chairman Ku, then Duque could take the staff, it really was a divine artifact staff, and openly go against Thun, this ungrateful ancient god. How could Duque not be happy? In his joy, Duque even pulled Jaina over and gave her a kiss in front of everyone. A group of B***starred shouted. Even an honest person like Theon had a, look on his face. It was one thing for Duque to have an affair with a few queens, but it was another thing to actually kiss her in front of everyone. One had to know that Duque first had an engagement with Jaina, then cancelled it, and then maintained an ambiguous relationship between master and disciple. Now, his behavior was really laughable. Jaina was so embarrassed that she just wanted to find a hole to hide in. Duque also realized that he had lost his composure. Facing Queen Sylvie's, "Kiss me in front of my face if you have the guts," gaze, Duque decisively shrunk back. Sure enough, some things couldn't be done in front of everyone. Otherwise, the people below wouldn't be able to pretend to be ignorant. Once the war stopped, they would definitely bring a large army to force a marriage. The gentleman Duque immediately put away his smiling face and put on a businesslike look. Next, we have to prepare for the crusade against Kel Thuzad. Chapter 1277. Kel Thuzad was a brute. Duque wouldn't have minded giving him the cold shoulder. It would have exhausted his patience and also his drive. Unfortunately, Thuzad wasn't. Even though he had lost most of his soul and had fused with an unknown soul, Duque's system elf scan concluded that Kel Thuzad was still very strong. This feeling, from the moment Duke opened the portal to the other dimension inside Naxxramas, became more and more clear. During the time he was trapped, Kel Thuzad must have done something. Kel Thuzad was a book that could be read thoroughly, then Duque might have lost interest in him. For such an intelligent and unique undead evil scientist, Duque always felt that Kel Thuzad would bring him surprises. The unknown would make people afraid. But the unknown would also bring a sense of freshness and challenge. If everyone knew, then it was just harvesting for the sake of accumulating equipment. Unfortunately, harvesting would never be as exciting as exploring. Worried that the heroic spirits would be affected by Kel Thuzad again, it was still a 15-man team of heroes that entered the other dimension, along with a temporary humanoid mount. As soon as they came out of the portal, everyone felt the strange cold air. "Ooh, it's so cold." Kalia shivered. She was already in such a state even though she was wearing a thick priest robe. The 3 female ranger heroes who were wearing 3-point armor were even more unbearable. There was no need for anyone to remind them. A group of people who were afraid of the cold immediately moved closer to Duque. Especially the 7 who were close to Duque, they instantly moved to the center position closest to Duque. Well, except for a certain mount that stood proudly to the side. "Damn, you used me as a fridge in the molten core, and now you're using me as a heater? You're really treating me like a variable frequency air conditioner." Duque complained as he opened the lava armor. The lava armor of a normal mage increased the mage's critical hit rate, and when someone dared to attack a mage in close combat, the magma would splash out and hit the attacker's face, achieving a damage reflection effect. As a Breaking Dawn archmage, Duque's modification of ordinary magic had long since reached a level that could shock the heavens and make the gods weep. It wasn't wrong to say that it was a variable frequency air conditioner. The system notifications kept ringing. Import theoretical knowledge of air conditioning. Start calculating entropy. Fluid mechanics introduction. Importing air circulation and thermodynamic circulation formulas. With the help of the system, Duque quickly adjusted his mana output. Not only did he let the heat of the lava armor spread out evenly, but he also expanded the heat range of the lava armor and condensed a wide area ice shield. Except this time, it was a wide area heating shield. The Iron Furnace Castle was surrounded by mountains that were covered in snow all year round, but Magna had to come here to freeload off the heat. This guy even laughed and patted Duque's thigh. "Oh, not bad. I used to look down on you people who played magic. It's great to be an air conditioner now. Whoever marries you will be blessed. It's warm in winter and cool in summer. You want me, a Breaking Dawn archmage, to change my profession to be an air conditioner? Do you believe that I won't freeze your D***CK forever?" Although he was complaining in his heart, Duque was surrounded by the girls and couldn't say anything. He just glared at the bastard dwarf king. The portal led them to a magnificent palace. Of course, this had nothing to do with Chairman Ku and Saffron, because this palace was a Titan creation that Naxxramas had left behind. The frost dragon was too huge, and Saffron, who had lost his ultimate transformation ability, could only build his nest outside. Under the cover of Duque's wide area heating shield, everyone started to walk out of the palace. Duque frowned. He didn't feel it at first, but now that he was closer, he could clearly feel the divinity contained in the cold air, frost divinity. Bloody hell, Arthas is really willing to invest so much money into this. Just as they walked out of the palace, a cold and evil voice came from above. He, finally willing to come in? Despicable thieves who want to steal the fortress of the great Lich King. T. Didn't the Calamity army steal the floating fortress from the Titans? Originally, Duque wanted to retort like this. The scene before them left Duque and the others speechless. What did they see? A bone dragon knight? Or a dragon lich and a bone dragon? Duque and the others didn't know what the hell this was. What appeared in front of everyone was the frost dragon Saffron. That was if they didn't count Kel, Thuzad on its neck. Dragons, as the top creature of the Azeroth food chain, were almost invincible. Its entire body could be seen 360 degrees without any blind spots. What? You said it exposed its belly? Firstly, their bellies had the same thick scales and dragon skin. Second, if 4 dragon claws scratched you, would you be afraid? Also, the dragon's neck could turn at almost any angle and could cover almost all parts of its back except for one, the place where the dragon's neck and body met. So, Onyxia, who was willing to be bitten by Duque in that place, symbolized her complete submission. Now, there was an additional Kel, Thuzad in that place. His entire lower body had fused with Saffron's neck, and it looked like a piece of white bone. This scene immediately gave Duque a headache. Previously, Duque was confident that he could take down Kel, Thuzad and Saffron because Saffron basically lost his intelligence after death, leaving only the instincts of the dragon race. So, a bone dragon was a bone dragon, and a lich was a lich. As long as Onyxia could viciously entangle Saffron, then Duque and the hero group could focus all their strength on killing Kel, Thuzad. At this moment, the most terrifying thing happened. The lich, who was relatively weak in close combat, had the most powerful body. The relatively weak bone dragon had a brain that could be used as a core. Duque didn't know if this combination was as perfect as he imagined it to be. If it was as he imagined, no, even if it was only 70%, it would be a nightmare for the Alliance. Kel, Thuzad was very satisfied with the expressions of the Alliance powerhouses. He waved his 2 huge claws that only had 4 fingers, and his dry jaw kept opening and closing, making a sinister sound. Oh, it seems that our uninvited guest is very surprised. It's no wonder. I don't know which despicable traitor sold out the information about Naxxramas. But I can guarantee that this change was not in the information provided by the traitor. Because until the moment before you controlled Naxxramas, I didn't decide to do this. Duque's muscles trembled slightly. Kel, Thuzad continued to grin. Speaking of which, I still have to thank you, Duke Marcus. Chapter 1278. Thank me? This time, Duque was dumbfounded. Sure enough, Kel, Thuzad couldn't wait to reveal the answer. If you hadn't betrayed me and corrected me, I wouldn't have been suppressed by Antonidas, and I wouldn't have been tortured by the holy light. Most of my soul would have been destroyed, and all that's left is pure resentment and hatred. And my soul from the giant dragon. Duque was speechless. Was this a blessing in disguise, or was it a death wish without limits? No wonder Kel seemed to be stronger than in history. It turned out that Nazul had such a heavy taste that he actually gave him a part of the giant dragon's soul. So, with less than 20% resentment and hatred, and pure evil thoughts, Kel assimilated the scattered giant dragon's soul? Was it Saffron's soul? Or was it another giant frost dragon's soul? This was really unimaginable. Back then, Duque made a small report and tricked Kel's soul. He never forgot about it, and even diluted and fused his own soul, just to take revenge. Cough cough. Forget it, I think you should just die early. Of course, sanctimonious hypocrite. Oh no, righteous, honest and reliable Duque waved his hand. Transmigrators don't lie. If I say I'll destroy your whole family, then I'll destroy your whole family. That's right, there's nothing wrong with it. Suddenly, a huge flame was released from under Duque's feet. At first glance, Duque seemed to have been swallowed by the flame, but as long as one ignored the sputtering fire elements, one could see that Duque was actually being lifted up by a huge pillar of fire. Then a second pillar, a third pillar. The whole group of platforms formed a mountain shape, with the middle high and the two sides low. Every Alliance powerhouse was gently pushed to the front of the platform. The platform got higher and higher, and the highest platform that was carrying Duque was instantly more than 10 stories high. Kel, Thuzad, who was originally sitting on the back of the giant frost dragon and looking down at Duque, was now being looked down at by Duque, who was in a higher position. Duque sat in the air, and a throne made entirely of flames automatically appeared behind him. At the top of the throne was the head of Ragnaros's two-horned Balrog. The left and right corners of the throne were sharp flame spikes that looked like the heads of a meteor hammer. The second hand of the throne was a pair of giant claws that Duque's hands rested on. The flames that should have burned the human body to ashes seemed to have turned into a soft and comfortable sofa. When Duque sat on it, he would not be burned, nor would he feel any discomfort. After taking away the divinity of Ragnaros, Duque finally displayed his unparalleled flame manipulation talent to the world today. He deliberately raised his chin by a full 60 degrees, and his sonorous and forceful voice resounded throughout the entire venue. Kel, Thuzad, you have violated the laws of heaven, the laws of earth, and the laws of man, challenging the boundaries of life and death with the greatest malice, crossing the uncrossable taboo line. People like you are the enemy of the world. I can save noble souls, and even depraved souls, I can redeem them. But only you, Kel, Thuzad, the only fate that awaits you is destruction, eternal destruction. From ancient times to the present, flames had been endowed with many meanings by various intelligent races. It was light. It was heat. It was even a myth. But whether it was the living or the dead, in their memories, the greatest role of flames had always been destruction. How many living beings were destroyed, and how many undead were purified? Perhaps the cause was just a fire seed from a tree that was struck by lightning, or a simple torch. The fire that Duque controlled at this time could not help but remind Kel, Thuzad of the flamethrowers that could be found all over the cities and towns of the Alliance. Almost every small village had one. Even two farmers who had received simple training could easily turn a company of zombies and skeleton soldiers into nothingness. Duque's arrogant expression at this moment reminded Kel, Thuzad of the terrifying years when the Dalajan was exposed and he was labeled as a taboo, despised, humiliated, and executed. Suddenly, the anger that had been sealed away for a long time dominated Kel, Thuzad's soul. He was furious. Demarcus, you will pay for your arrogance. You will pay the most tragic price for everything you have done. I've changed my mind. Before I send your arrogant and ridiculous soul to His Majesty the Lich King, I will first thoroughly torture you. Kel, Thuzad screamed. The frost dragon Sapphiron, who clearly felt its master's emotions, also opened its white and bloodless jaws. Roar! It was a terrifying dragon's roar that came from the soul. The experts of the Alliance felt a chill in their hearts at the same time. Duque had a proud smile on his face. He stood up from the blazing flame throne, stretched out his right hand, hooked his index finger, and said with incomparable contempt, "Come." Kel, Thuzad only felt that his frozen soul was suddenly ignited by the flames of anger. Without his command, the frost dragon under him had already roared and rolled up a terrifying ice tornado, pouncing towards Duque on the blazing flame throne. No one noticed that Onyxia had taken a deep breath after the blazing flame monarch had left. It wasn't until the black dragon's huge head revealed a cruel smile that came out from the blazing pillar of fire that Kel, Thuzad realized that he had fallen into Duque's trap again. Onyxia's famous big move, deep breath. The dragon's breath that was spat out was like a cone-shaped cloud of fire. The turbulence brought with it a dark red light that was both Onyxia's divinity and Duque's divinity. Blazing and berserk dragon breath gushed out, easily turning this originally white world into a sea of fire. The sky was burning, the earth was burning, and the air was filled with the crackling sound of the flowing flames. The ice and fire tornadoes created by the two dragons collided in midair. At that moment, The entire space seemed to flash with the unique brilliance of elemental lines. The laws of space seemed to have been completely rewritten in an instant. Half of the space was densely packed with crimson flame patterns, as if these flame patterns could immediately turn this place into a second molten core. Half of the white space flashed with layers of overlapping silver networks, as if it wanted to pull all living beings into the eternal ice and snow of no scent, dispersing all heat and stopping all life. Two completely different scenes completely enveloped the entire Frost Dragon's palace and spread in all directions. With the power of the two dragons as the center, it was as if there was a moment of delay before a shockwave swept across the entire space. At that moment, the gorgeous palace seemed to have suffered a terrible earthquake. The gorgeous tiles under their feet could not withstand the damage brought by the turbulent flow of elemental elements and were lifted up one after another. However, before they could splash out and cause harm to the people around them, they had already turned into powder in the aftermath of the devastating power. Chapter 1279. This power. Kalia was tongue-tied. Even people like Kalia, who were close to Duque, were shocked by Duque's power, let alone people like Benedettas who were not in the mainstream circle. Unknowingly, Duque's power had already transcended the mortal world. Duque had always thought that he had not transcended the realm of mortals. In the eyes of others, Duque was riding on the once incomparably evil black dragon, using the surging flames of divinity to suppress the darkest icy wind. This kind of scene was undoubtedly spectacular in the domain of the gods. Magni transformed, and in his burly mountain king form, he stood at the front of the team. Two of the 5 silver saints, Theon and Gavin Rad, shone with golden light as they stood at the 2 wings. The 3 of them formed the most solid vanguard formation, like a triangular shield, firmly blocking the front of the elemental turbulence. Later, Jaina summoned an arcane shield and gently wrapped the remaining alliance powerhouses within it. Everyone looked at the 2 groups of opponents fighting in midair with an expression that was close to worship. At first glance, the 2 sides seemed to be evenly matched. Soon, everyone realized the difference. Saffron was definitely powerful when he was alive. In terms of status, he was second only to the Blue Dragon Queen, Syndagosa. However, after he died, he became a frost dragon with a bone dragon foundation. All that was left of him was his battle instincts. Originally, Onyxia was definitely stronger than Saffron. Unfortunately, after any dragon was seriously injured, their recovery speed was not that fast. Right now, she was only at about 60% of her strength. There shouldn't have been much of a difference. The difference was in the master. Kel Thuzad had obviously just injected the frost divinity into his body. His use of this power that was beyond his imagination was far inferior to Duque, who had the help of the system and was familiar with training for a longer period of time. It seemed to be a pure elemental contest without any fancy tricks. Under Duque's guidance, Onyxia deliberately turned the dragon's breath, which had been strengthened by Duque's divine power, into a spiral cone shape. As a result, after a moment of stalemate, the winner of this massive battle in the air was decided in a few seconds. Onyxia's dragon breath easily dispersed Saffron's icy wind, and the remaining flames struck Saffron's left bony wing, exploding into sparks. The elemental erosion directly affected the soul level, and the frost dragon immediately howled in pain. Even the Red Dragon Queen Alexstrasza had to take a breather after unleashing her most powerful dragon breath. For the giant dragon, the next battle would be hand-to-hand combat. In terms of body size, Onyxia did not have an advantage. But that depended on who he was compared to. If they were both living dragons, the older they were, the more powerful they were, the more experience they had, and the more strength and agility they had. The problem was that one was a bone dragon that had been dead for many years and only had its bones and soul left, while the other was a semi-god-level giant dragon that was alive and kicking. Its complete muscles and tendons gave it strength and speed bonuses that were not something a bone dragon could compare to. On top of that, there was a sinister, oh no, a scheming master around. Use Vine to slow him down. Get a stream of fire to distract his frost shield and counterattack. On the dragon's back, Duque and Kel, Thuzad bombarded each other with spells. All kinds of elemental spells went back and forth, and they were having a lot of fun. But on the giant dragon level, it was obvious that the Black Dragon Princess was suppressing Saffron. The advantage in speed and the lack of tendons and muscles severely affected Saffron's speed. After receiving consecutive heavy blows, Onyxia used Dragon Claw Sweep and Dragon Wing Slap combo. Saffron finally could not hold on any longer, and his movements clearly slowed down for a moment. The Black Dragon, who was slightly smaller in size, seized the opportunity and suddenly crouched to avoid Saffron's counterattack. Almost rolling on the ground, it whipped its tail and hit Saffron's waist heavily with its gigantic meteor hammer-like tail. The spectators could clearly see that at least 2 of Saffron's ribs on the right side were broken, and 5 or 6 ribs had cracks. Saffron let out another soul wail. He used all his strength to swing his bone dragon tail, trying to counterattack and severely injure Onyxia, who knew that the Black Dragon would suddenly climb up and fly even higher. When Duque's flame blast almost hit the Great Lich's face, Onyxia saw the opportunity and extended her dragon neck, giving Saffron's left chest a moderate amount of dragon breath. The blazing dragon breath directly hit the frost aura floating in the ice dragon's chest. That was actually the frost dragon's heart, but that frost aura could not be attacked by physical means. The frost dragon, who was covered in wounds, fell from the sky with Kel, Thuzad. He crashed to the ground with a loud crash. His enormous body instantly smashed open a huge crater that was at least 5 meters deep and had a radius of several hundred meters sunk in. At that moment, it was as if the entire area let out a cry of pain. The sunken ground layer by layer spread in all directions, and the magnificent palace not far away also collapsed. Kel, Thuzad, who had his upper and lower jaws like a rake, was in a sorry state. Finally, he cried out weakly, "Protect me!" Suddenly, the surroundings became blurry, as if there was a thin layer of ice fog covering the distance, making it difficult to see clearly. Countless skeleton soldiers, death knights, liches, gargoyles, and abominations rushed out from the ice fog, trying to protect their master. Unfortunately, in just one move, a golden holy flame had completely submerged them. Kel, Thuzad's red soulfire eyes looked blankly at his subordinates being destroyed by the paladins in front of him. The abominations shed their skin in the holy light, revealing burning muscles, bones, and internal organs. They then turned into ashes and dissipated into the air. Kel, Thuzad was stunned for a moment. Damn, the pressure that Duque gave me was too much, and I actually forgot about these guys. Kel, Thuzad lost his composure due to a rare anger. He had to do something now, or he would be crushed and destroyed by Duque. Duke Marcus, I admit that I am not as good as you in a direct battle, but can you protect every single one of your women? Ha! The Great Lich grinned. Half of his body was stuck in the mud, but he still used his left hand that could move to make a casting gesture. Come, have a taste of my undead fantasy. Suddenly, a terrifying will covered the entire space. An unknown shockwave blasted towards the alliance of heroes. Almost everyone was sent flying into the sky. Aurelia somersaulted 3 times in the air before she stabilized herself. A shadow arrow brushed past the bottom of her boots and hit a nearby pillar. The destructive black air currents easily melted the pillar that was so thick that it would take 2 people to wrap their arms around it. Chapter 1280. The strange shockwave blew most of the heroes away, and some of them even tumbled a few times. Kalia covered her sore nose, tears streaming down her face. She looked rather pitiful. She saw Alicia crawl out of the ice barrier, her hands covering her red forehead. It was obvious that she had no choice but to use the godly skill, ice barrier, at the last moment. Everyone realized that the scene had abruptly changed from the vast ice dragon's lair to a mysterious palace filled with the aura of death. In the distance, the wails of the undead were heart-wrenching. The white fog that could not be seen clearly bound the evil spirits, skeletons, and zombies, forming a huge wall of the dead. On top of the wall, there were thousands of corpses. Their lower bodies were fused into the wall. Some of them were frantically trying to pull their bodies out, while others were resentfully reaching out their horrifying arms towards the experts of the Alliance. Kalia's eyes widened. Suddenly, she saw a burly male undead wearing the armor of a Stormwind City knight charging out of the fog, raising his two-handed greatsword high and slashing at her. Even though Kalia had experienced many battles, she only had time to add on one of her holy word shield skills. The commandment priest being closed in by a warrior was a rather helpless and despairing thing. Apart from taking it head-on, there was no good way to pull away again. No, before pulling away, she first had to take on this undead giant slash. Commandment magic that could be easily blocked by 10 knights at the same time was easily broken. Kalia's heart was seized by terror in an instant. She could only subconsciously raise the staff in her hand, trying in vain to use her weak arms to withstand this terrifying blow. Be careful! At the critical moment, Gavin Rad arrived like the wind. The long and broad wind sword dangerously blocked the giant's blade at the last moment. There was no clanging sound of metal colliding. The strong wind and thunder on the wind sword directly bounced off the giant's heavy sword. Vesuvius! Gavin Rad frowned. Long before the attack on Naxxramas, every Alliance hero had received intelligence from Duque, pointing out the powerhouses who had been killed and then joined the Scourge army while Naxxramas was wreaking havoc all over the continent. However, he didn't expect that the guy who should have been destroyed in the fortress's bombardment would actually reappear in this strange space. On the other side, Jaina had exchanged more than 10 blows with a shadow sorcerer who had long white hair and thick dark circles under his eyes. He looked like a big-shot cultivator who hadn't slept for God knew how many nights. The image of this guy in front of him suddenly overlapped with the other catastrophe leader in the intelligence report. Plague messenger noise? Jaina cried out involuntarily. Theon slashed Ashbringer at a huge beetle-like monster, but unfortunately, the holy light he swung out was swallowed by the monster. That was a heavy blow that could easily turn a large group of undead into ashes. However, the other party did not dodge or evade. He took it head-on with his powerful body. Theon's expression darkened. A nub, recon? If those people who should have been killed according to the intelligence report appeared here and shocked the Alliance experts, then the Alliance experts would be shocked. As for the last person, he shocked them to the extreme. Every Alliance expert's eyes widened as they saw a pair of huge dragon wings whizzing out of the white fog in front of them. After dispersing the cold white mist, a terrifying face was revealed. Under the 2 pairs of huge blue horns was a pair of long and narrow eyes that looked like golden pearls. They shone with an ominous glint. The thick sky blue scales were covered with horny bone plates that looked like a swarm of bees. Each of the limbs was as thick and powerful as the pillars of a great hall. The claws were so sharp that they could easily tear apart a city wall, and the huge bloody mouth was filled with the aura of frost. Even if they did not recognize the giant beast's appearance, based on the same perception, every single one of the Alliance's powerhouses whispered the same name, Sapphiron. This was impossible. Everyone knew it was impossible. 6 years ago, Archimonde died. When Arthas responded to the call of the Lich King Nizul and rushed to Northrend to save him, he met the Blue Dragon Sapphiron. At that time, Sapphiron was a capable general under the Blue Dragon King Malygos, and was quite a powerful blue dragon in the Blue Dragon race. But when he met the 2 heroes, Arthas and Anub Recon, he couldn't stand up to them. After Sapphiron was defeated and killed, Arthas used the power of corruption to revive Sapphiron as a frost dragon. The insufferably arrogant frost dragon Sapphiron became the claws of the Scourge army. Just a moment ago, everyone had seen Sapphiron's skeletal form. How could they see a Sapphiron that seemed to be alive again? Magni, who was in his god's descent state, smashed a fat abomination leader away with his hammer. He immediately yelled, "Jaina? Something's wrong. Are these guys illusions? If we get killed, will we really die?" Duque wasn't here, so Jaina, who was also a Breaking Dawn wizard, had the highest authority here. As Jaina attacked Noise with frost magic, her eyes constantly scanned the surroundings. Her senses were fully activated, and she kept comparing the situation around her with all the information she knew. Suddenly, she remembered a story that Duque had told her many years ago about a warm man in a red shirt. It had nothing to do with illusions. It was a magic spell that used the caster's mental landscape to rewrite reality. The name of this forbidden spell was Inherent Barrier. Once this forbidden spell was activated, it would cause the surrounding space to change into a completely different scenery. The materialization of the mental landscape meant that the inherent barrier would replace oneself and the world without changing one's realm. At this time, the size of oneself and the world would be swapped, and the world would be completely locked in a small container. In Duke's example, the strange heroic spirit named Wei Gong is the wolf, had its inherent enchantment materialized into a red wilderness with countless ownerless sword tombstones. What appeared on the horizon was leaping flames, and in the distance were several huge gears. Jaina couldn't be sure, but Duke's example was the closest one she could think of. She immediately shouted, "Don't die. If we die in this world, we will also become corpses outside." I don't know if this is the inherent barrier that Duke mentioned, but I only know that to maintain such a terrifying illusory space requires an astronomical amount of mana, even for a demigod wizard. At this moment, in the outside world, Duke stared at Kel Thizad with a cold expression. How extravagant! To maintain this illusory world, the amount of mana you use every second is equivalent to the total mana of a Breaking Dawn wizard, right? Chapter 1281. It was impossible for Kel Thuzad to know that Duke had the system Elf, the ultimate weapon among the ultimate weapons. He was only secretly shocked by Duke's terrifying observation skills. In this regard, he deepened his own judgment of the situation. Opposite him, Duke held onto Onyxia's reins and let her hang in the air. All of a sudden, his comrades and lover disappeared. This was no doubt a blow to Duke, but it was also a turning point. That was because the system Elf's data stream was pouring down on his retina, which he hadn't seen in a long time. A huge amount of data poured into Duke's spiritual sea. After transmigrating for so long from the initial discomfort, it had now become very natural. Duke could already read at least 100 pages of A4 paper in 1 second. In a sense, Duke could be considered a Superman. The unknown always easily brought fear, but when the mysterious veil was lifted in front of him, the excitement and thrill was like the goddess of victory lifting her skirt. That was the smell of the sea, cough cough. The above was purely a slip of the hand and an irresponsible imagination. It had to be said that Kel Thuzad used his own magic and will to cast a forbidden spell-level magic, creating a space within a space, pulling the enemy in and beating him up. This was a move that Duke liked. The corners of Duke's mouth curled up in a strange arc, and he asked despite knowing the answer, "I'm just curious, why don't you pull me into that small world?" Kel Thuzad was extremely cunning. "When you become a great lich loyal to my lord, I'll tell you." An incomparably dazzling magic array that emitted a mysterious white radiance suddenly appeared below Duke and Onyxia. 10 times the gravity, coupled with a strong elemental repulsion, made Duke and Onyxia immediately fall into a trap. "This is..." roar. The sudden control caused the movements of Duke and his servant to pause. They thought that Kel Thuzad would take the opportunity to attack. Who knew that he would actually be scared? No, this should be called a strategic retreat. Kel Thuzad was in a sorry state as he controlled the frost dragon that was the lower half of his body. He could only rely on his 4 skeletal limbs to escape. They left the frost dragon's hall without looking back and fled into the huge corridor, as if they wanted to enter Kel Thuzad's own hall. At the same time, countless undyings swarmed out from all directions. Duke narrowed his eyes and looked at the red human-shaped frames on his retina. His face sank. He finally understood why Kel Thuzad had found so many elite monsters as cannon fodder. This guy was trying to stall for time until the undead fantasy, which was similar to an inherent enchantment, killed Theon and the others, and then turned them into powerful undead. Then they would turn around and deal with Duke. Duke snorted coldly. "Seeing that you can't deal with me, you want to use the deaths of my family, friends, and lovers to provoke me and tempt me into depravity? Kel Thuzad, no wonder you can't be seen in public. You have the nerve to use such a petty trick on me?" So what if I'm petty? As long as it works, hee. Kel, Thuzad's voice floated in the corridor. Idiot. You've underestimated me, and you've underestimated the strength of my companions and lovers. With Duque's current status, it could be said that he could have as many ordinary women as he wanted. Among the nobles of various countries, there was no lack of beauties who could be regarded as goddesses before Duque crossed over. However, Duque did not touch any of them. But he was not a saint. It was precisely because this world was too dangerous that Duque could not guarantee that he could protect his own women. In the beginning, it was a natural development. Later on, Duque had purposely chosen heroic girls who could fight and were able to do well in combat. Just look at Queen Sylvanas. If an ordinary enemy dared to have any ideas about her, they must be tired of living. What they should be worried about was the enemy's life. Since the system had analyzed the characteristics and strength of Kel, Thuzad's undead fantasy, then Duque could roughly calculate how much time he had left. Duque did not waste time. He cursed in a low voice, squeezed his legs, and one man and one dragon directly rushed into the huge corridor. Boom! When the fire elemental magic erupted from Duque's body like a volcanic eruption, anyone would feel an invincible aura. Kel, Thuzad felt that he had clearly abandoned the emotion called fear, but the feeling that Duque gave him now, even if it was converted into soul fluctuations, was still fear. Duque, one man and one dragon, the violent flames with the aura of divinity surged out like a tsunami. Onyxia stomped down with her claws, and in the huge corridor that was at least 100 stories high and as wide as 10 football fields, a series of "kacha" sounds rang out. Terrifying cracks appeared on the gorgeous yet sturdy floor of the corridor. At this time, the powerful defense system began to operate, but Duque was like a real god. Even though this was once Kel, Thuzad's own mage tower and had repeatedly strengthened the defense with magic, it could not stop him and the Black Dragon Princess footsteps. The guardian statues that were built with the Death Knights as the blueprint came to life and raised their swords against Duque and his servants. One by one, the Death Knights rode their undead warhorses and rushed forward at high speed under the cover of the fat abomination. In mid-air, hundreds and thousands of gargoyles pounced over. Master? Onyxia was inquiring. Duque's lips curled up. Just focus on chasing. Yes. Until today. Now that Duque was infinitely close to the divine realm, how could Duque care about these ordinary elite monsters? His eyes widened, and suddenly, countless small black dragon heads made of arcane energy appeared in the air around Onyxia. Every dragon head was vivid and lifelike, exactly the same as the head of the Black Dragon Princess. Even though Onyxia had already sensed it in her heart, she was still slightly startled. The next moment, every arcane dragon head opened its mouth at the same time. That was a dragon's breath. That was a fireball. That was a flame blast. That was a rain of flames. That was a waterfall of fire that fell from the sky. The guardian statues immediately collapsed. Whether it was the abomination or the Death Knights, in front of the raging flames, they instantly turned into dust and disappeared in the wind. The gargoyles that should have caused trouble all collapsed into dust. One man and one dragon rushed into the corridor, and nothing could stop them for even a minute and a half. With just a flap of Onyxia's wings, Kel, Thuzad's defense instantly collapsed. At this moment, Duque seemed to be possessed by the Titan of the Pantheon Temple. He was the invincible god that conquered and transformed all the galaxies back then. No matter what kind of existence it was, it could not stop his footsteps. Impossible! In the distance, the Great Lich's terrified voice came. Chapter 1282. Impossible? Why is it impossible? Duque sneered and said something that Chairman Ku did not understand. Idiot, not everyone can win Tianji's horse race. It had to be said that Kel, Thuzad was very creative. He wanted to use a new move to deal with Duque's companions while using cannon fodder to stall for time. But so what? Hundreds and thousands of elites rushed out from the corridor, all using their strongest combat skills and ultimate magic. However, these elite monsters, who could slaughter a village or a town on their own in the outside world, were like ants in front of Duque and Onyxia. Once the sea of fire arrived, everything collapsed. There was no blood, only complete destruction. These hundreds and thousands of powerful undead creatures could not stop Duque at all and were destroyed in the blink of an eye. 3 frost bone dragons pounced over with their fangs and claws bared. They seemed to still have the great ferocity they had when they were alive, and even the earth trembled. Without a doubt, these 3 bone dragons had been blessed by Syndagosa's special secret technique. Bang! At this moment, Onyxia's left claw stepped out and instantly made a magnificent 360-degree turn that did not match her huge body. Normally, dragons would rarely make such a fancy attack. As Duque's mount, as a demigod dragon connected to Duque's soul, Onyxia could clearly see a wave-like arc. The long and sturdy dragon tail was like the largest meteor hammer in the world. With unparalleled power and prestige, it swept over. The black dragon silhouettes seemed to have split the space apart. With a flash of black light, a violent whistling sound was heard, followed by 3 consecutive explosions. The heads of the 3 ice frost bone dragons instantly exploded. This scene was many times more exciting than a bowling ball. So what if he had been blessed by Syndagosa? So what if he had been an ancient dragon? Unless it was Syndagosa himself, any dragon below the Dragon King that had become a bone dragon would not be able to gain the favor of Onyxia and Duque when they were almost one with each other. Roar, roar. Even Onyxia was pleasantly surprised by such a hearty attack. She couldn't help but stretch her neck and roar. The raging flames and the holy aura around Duke's body caused the souls of almost every undead creature that he and Oni destroyed to perish. Their combination was like the most ferocious weapon in the world, seemingly capable of slaughtering gods and devils. Thuzad's plan worked, but he also miscalculated. As someone who had been suppressed from the beginning to the end, he clearly understood his position. Perhaps before Naxxramas fell into the temple of An-Karaj, he still had a chance to win against Duque. After their own side was forcefully weakened by Duque, whether it was the loss of a leader or the loss of magic reserves, Naxxramas' combat power had fallen to a dangerous level. When Duque stole control of the fortress and trapped him and Sapphiron, he knew that it was only a matter of time before the leaders of the last 3 zones were destroyed. This was a last-ditch struggle, but it was also a last-ditch effort. Thuzad had no choice but to take the risk and play a game of high-level horses against low-level horses. He tried to use cannon fodder to stall for time and win in the undead fantasy, thus turning the tables. Unfortunately, he ran into Duque. In a few moments, the system genie scanned that the magic supporting the defense system was not Thuzad's magic. If one had to say something, it was that Thuzad used the souls stored in Naxxramas as fuel to supply the undead army to besiege Duque. Duque seemed to be using his own magic to crazily output, but in fact, most of the fireballs were hitting the magic nodes of the defense system in the corridor. When Thuzad poured all his magic into the undead fantasy, there was the unstoppable scene of Duque and his dragon. Not long after, Duque had already killed his way to the hall where Thuzad was. On the north side of the hall, the half-crippled Sapphire curled up its body and surrounded Thuzad, making a defensive posture. Thuzad seemed to be unable to suppress his anger. He raised a blood-red scroll high up. Bastard! Bastard! You forced me, Duke Marcus. I've changed my mind. I'll make you pay the most terrible price. Eternally, this was a dragonskin contract filled with darkness and coldness. Even 100 meters away, one could clearly feel the cold aura overflowing from it, and one could faintly hear the cries of thousands of wronged souls. The system genie's analysis made Duque's heart skip a beat. After scanning, the contract has the blood of Great Chieftain Nizul. Great Chieftain Nizul? Wasn't that after the end of World War II at the Dark Portal? Before that big explosion, Nizul was still a dignified great chieftain, a living person with flesh and blood. Duque only knew that according to the original history, Nizul was captured by Jaden and tortured to his heart's content. Not only did he lose his life, but even his soul was compressed and packed into an ice skeleton. He did not expect that there was a soul contract forged with the blood of his true beast. Under the system scan, Duque could clearly see that this contract, which was written in the Eridar language, only had half of it left. However, this was not a problem for Duque, who was proficient in the Eridar language. In less than 1/100th of a second, a complete contract appeared on Duque's retina. This was the soul contract that Kil Jaden forced Nazul to sign. It was branded with the great chieftain's true beast oath. Nazul swore eternal loyalty to the Burning Legion, and the words were branded on it. It could be said that this contract was the basis for Kil Jaden to send Nazul, who had become a Lich King, to Azeroth to cause trouble. This contract contained the strongest laws of Eridar and the will of countless Void Lords to help suppress it. There was also Kil Jaden's four-fingered handprint on it. In theory, if Nazul tried to break free from the contract, this demonic handprint would cross space and time to teach Nazul a lesson. There were many harsh terms on the blood contract. Even if the contract had already expired, Duque felt suffocated just by looking at it. He could not help but tremble. Damn, it seemed that a guy called Infernal Affairs had broken free from the soul contract of the Burning Legion. After destroying the largest fortress in the Twisting Nether, the Burning Legion's strictness towards the soul contract had reached a peak. According to this contract, if Nazul disobeyed Kil Jaden's orders, 99% of his soul would receive the most terrible revenge. Fortunately, the remaining 1% would only be used to witness his eternal pain. However, Nazul still chose to rebel. At the cost of his own soul being split, his soul being infinitely diluted, and even losing himself. Chapter 1283. Suddenly, everything could be explained. Even if Nazul was a coward from beginning to end, and did not have the courage to cheat his compatriots, nor did he have the courage to fight against the demons, but beast, human, eternal, for slave. After years of inhumane torture, his body was broken by Kil Jaden, and even his bones were turned to ashes. He never gave up his heart of freedom. On the other hand, the demon commander's contract was not so easily violated. This was why after Archimonde died, Nazul chose to jump ship and set up his own mountain. His magic power suddenly dropped. Even his soul was almost worn out because of the contract's backlash. It would be strange if he was not weak. On the other hand, no one thought that Arthas would be so loyal that she ran to save her master. Not only did she kill a large number of guys who blocked her way, but she also defeated Illidan, who worked for Kil Jaden, in one fell swoop. Finally, she ascended the frozen throne and merged with Nazul's poor remnant soul that had been diluted many times. The perfect fusion of an orc's soul and a death knight who was once a human was enough to make one drunk. Duque did not know why Kel Thuzad took out this half of the contract at this time, but it could not be anything good. He did not give Duque time to react. Hula! Kel Thuzad's gold-rimmed purple hat seemed to fall with the wind. The part of the white bone that should have been between his eyebrows actually opened up a small door the size of a pinky. The side of the door flowed with a gray-white light. The hazy feeling was as if he had ground his own bones into ashes and scattered them. This was more like he had directly poured out the most profound and mysterious evil curse from his endless spiritual world. When the gray-white light between his eyebrows fell on Nazul's blood contract, a mysterious law that the system elves could not analyze on the spot melted. The blood stains on the dragonskin blood contract felt lighter on the spot. The next moment, the frost in the entire hull suddenly became several times stronger. A soul voice that was compressed to less than 10 seconds rushed into Duque's eardrums. If Duque was an ordinary person, he would have long ago gone deaf from this noise-like compressed audio. When Duque naturally unraveled this audio, even though time passed very slowly in the outside world, Duque could clearly hear Kel Thuzad's death declaration. It was just a man and a dragon, yet they were not afraid of going against the Calamity Army, no, even the entire world of death. As expected of the Alliance's hero, Duke Marcus. I have already punished you 3 times for your arrogance. That's right, what you're tasting right now is the 3 consecutive traps that I've painstakingly laid out. 3? Duque could not help but frown. The most mellow poisonous wine could only be released at the last moment. It was very normal for a small amount of frost divinity to leak out. Then this method of casting a wide net succeeded. Duque was directly hit. No. Feeling the rapidly weakening soul connection, Onyxia was stunned. She no longer cared about fighting and actually shrunk at high speed on the spot. She turned into her human form and hugged the bloody Duque. Bastard! You lied to me. Aren't you unkillable? Didn't you say you were going to change my fate? But seeing Onyxia lose her composure, Thuzad's mood suddenly exploded. His body slowly rose from saffron, and milky white foam appeared where his lower body was connected to the frost dragon. Then he separated from the frost dragon. Ha! Duke Marcus! You're finally dead. Ha! Feeling the decline of Duque's soul fire, Thuzad was very happy. He was so happy that countless bubbles of pleasure rushed into the depths of his soul, nourishing every corner of his soul. Onyxia, don't struggle. Follow your master and serve the great Lich King. Onyxia raised her head. A tearful smile suddenly appeared on her tear-stained face. Idiot! Ha! Thuzad suddenly felt that something was wrong. At this moment, a bright golden light suddenly pierced through his chest, and the spiral-shaped blade radiated light in all directions. Chapter 1284. A dash. The pain of his soul collapsing could not be described with words. As an immortal, Thuzad was already immune to most physical attacks. Conversely, the damage that holy attacks could do to him was multiplied. For a divine artifact sword of the divine element to pierce through his soul fire was tantamount to a calamity. The excruciating pain in his soul caused his entire skeletal body to twitch violently as he arched his back. Less than 5 steps away from his feet, the frost dragon Saffron reacted and pounced, stretching its neck to bite him. Crack! When the white dragon teeth closed, it bit empty air. Duque used a gorgeous flash to avoid the frost dragon's determined attack. However, before he drew Duque's moral integrity, Duque gave almost all the holy light he could use to Chairman Ku. Onyxia knelt on the ground. She still had that noble and slightly charming temperament, and her face still had the sorrow of losing her husband and master. This was the person who was once popular in the upper echelons of Stormwind, known as the #1 beauty. No matter when, she was always so charming, so intoxicating. Hey, are you done acting? Duque was speechless as he looked at Onyxia, who was seductively hugging his bloodied mirror image doppelganger, who had entered acting mode again. The soul connection was hard to deceive. If Duque was about to die, she would be able to sense it at the first moment. However, it was also because of her acting skills that she could put on a good show, allowing Duque to turn the tables on Thuzad. That's right. Duque had some doubts about the frost divinity that was spreading in the air. Even if Chairman Ku had a lot of business, he could not just throw divinity around, even if it was a very small amount. For high-purity divinity, no matter how small a mosquito was, it was still meat. So, after Duque broke into the corridor, he directly told the Black Dragon Princess to make a mirror image doppelganger on the dragon saddle, and he hid near the dragon's wings and turned invisible. In order to make it look real, he even gave all the armor and equipment he used before to the mirror image doppelganger. He suppressed his aura to the lowest possible. Sure enough, it was as expected. The Black Dragon Princess looked smugly at the Great Lich who had stepped into destruction. She frowned slightly and continued to possess the Shadow Queen. Speaking of which, even when this fellow frowned and pretended to be crying for his master, he was still quite handsome. Woo-woo-woo. Master, you died so miserably. Onyxia howled dryly. Duque bared his teeth. If she hadn't cried for me, I might have thought that she was so beautiful, so charming, and even pitiful. I might even have wanted to play with her. But now, Duque raised his leg and kicked Onyxia's plump and bouncy butt. Time to work. Onyxia pretended to be unhappy as she rolled her eyes at Duque. She then transformed into her dragon form again and pounced towards the pitiful Saffron. Frankly speaking, without a powerful fighter like the Black Dragon Princess, Duque would have to spend a lot of effort to deal with Saffron. But now that Thuzad was separated from Saffron, the Lich was the Lich, and the Bone Dragon was the Bone Dragon. Only 3 Saffron could pose a threat to the Black Dragon Princess. Duque didn't care about the loud battle next to him. In fact, it was a fully armed adult beating up a small child. He stood with his hands behind his back. Under the support of the rising flame base, he floated in front of the Great Lich. Even though he was in extreme pain, Thuzad still used the coldest tone and said sternly, "Duque, don't think that you've won. His Majesty the Lich King will avenge me. He won't torture your soul for billions of years, and he won't let me hear your mournful cries of repentance. The Scourge army will not give up." Duque's thoughts moved. Thuzad immediately screamed. The golden light that gushed out of his chest became stronger. The golden light of this small sun was like a pillar that pierced through his back, and then squeezed out of his chest. What was even more terrifying was that this holy light seemed to have a life of its own. It gently melted Thuzad's ribs, as if it wanted to completely wear down the rotten white bones of his chest until it turned into powder. "No," the Great Lich screamed again. The cold soul fire in his body that seemed to always be maintained at absolute zero finally seemed to have heat that it shouldn't have. It was clearly a flame that was always flickering, but when an even more intense golden light gushed out, golden runes filled with holy aura seemed to grow in the middle of his soul. These runes formed a magic circle that had never been seen before. No, it was not a magic circle. This was a brand new holy law that Thuzad had never seen before. This law obviously carried a mark that did not belong to this world. When this mark appeared, it seemed to be forcibly pulling Thuzad's soul out of this mortal world. It forcibly cut off his connection with all mortal things in Azeroth, and prohibited him from extracting all the power in the world. Sadness, fear, hatred, all the negative energy was isolated by this golden mark. Impossible! This is no longer the power of mortals. Thuzad screamed and tried to put his 2 skeletal palms with only 4 fingers on Duque's shoulder. He had the deepest question. Why? This complicated power that involved the origin of the world, even if it was taken apart and mortals studied it for 1,000,000 years, they might not be able to see through it. Why could Duque do it? Facing Thuzad's confusion, Duque said calmly, "It's not that I'm too strong, it's just that in the field of elements, you're too weak. Earth, water, fire, wind, these 4 elements. When you master the mechanism of these 4 basic elements in this world, you can also be like me, isolating opponents with insufficient strength and preventing them from coming into contact with this world. What a pity! You have the frost divinity that Nazul left for you, but you don't know how to use it. Moreover, have you forgotten that this is a fortress left behind by the creation titans of the Pantheon? The titans were godlike existences. How could the things they left behind be used by a small Breaking Dawn mage who played with necromancy magic? Apart from Sargeras, who was also a titan, other races and civilizations did not even have the ability to completely master the defense system, let alone modify the program. The law that Duque had just used was the purification law hidden in the fortress. It could amplify the power of the holy system tenfold. Duque just happened to be at the right time, so he used it directly. He didn't have the divinity of the holy system, so he couldn't use Naxxramas. Since he had encountered it, he might as well give it to Thuzad. Chapter 1285. Sighing was just sighing. Duque had no intention of recruiting Chairman Ku. Thuzad wasn't the Black Witch Farina. Farina was bad, but there was no direct conflict or hatred between them. Chairman Ku was different. Duque had reported him in advance and let him bathe in Uther's holy light. In addition, he worshipped Nazul and Arthas. Yes, Duque had tortured Chairman Ku's 2 idols. Nazul was blasted into Jaden's embrace. Second Fool's childhood sweetheart was stolen by Duque, his hand was broken, and he suffered a big loss in Felwood. With this blood feud as a foundation, Duque had no intention of letting Thuzad be his elemental emissary. Duque was definitely not interested in such a stubborn and cockroach-like guy. Even if he beat the shit out of him, he could still leave behind a disaster. Alright. In the past, Duque didn't have the ability to destroy souls. Now that he did, he naturally wouldn't hold back. Goodbye. I'll let you be another stepping stone on my hero's path. Duque waved his hand, and the golden light that erupted from Chairman Ku's chest suddenly flourished. The dazzling light became brighter and more intense. When the golden light reached the size of a small sun, Kel, Thuzad, an existence that countless people feared and hated, disintegrated into an unknown substance that wasn't even ashes, was forever annihilated from this world. In the undead fantasy, the Alliance hero group was fighting with the remnant souls of the Scourge leaders, or rather, the Illusions. Those seemingly huge monster leaders had all kinds of fierce moves and overwhelming power, but they weren't fatal. For some reason, it felt like the attack power of those monster leaders had been severely weakened. For example, the hate boss Patchwork. When he swung his large rusty kitchen knife down, the first impression he gave people was that the earth was shaking. But what he smashed out was a 1-meter square pit. Even Kalia, when she saw Patchwork's slow hand gesture, as long as she wasn't completely distracted by other things, she still wouldn't be killed on the spot. However, the situation of the team was worsening. Benedictus made a mistake in dodging and was hit until his calf was fractured. Even after first aid, the fracture still hindered his movements. During the fierce battle, Edwin Van Cleef was bitten on the arm by the leader of the stitched monsters, the giant dog Glass. There were at least 10 fractures on his left arm. Even so, he still bit the extra dagger in his mouth and continued to fight. Riadaline's back was pierced by the Beetle King Anub-Rican. Even with the emergency healing from the Holy Light spell, the bowl-sized hole on her shoulder blade was a ghastly sight. Although no one in the team had died yet, and they were far from reaching their so-called limits, everyone knew that things were not looking good. While everyone in the team was fighting a bloody battle, all the enemies in front of them suddenly disappeared. Gavin Rad/ only hit the air. The feeling of slashing with his sword suddenly turning into nothing made him feel a little uncomfortable. The Windrunner sisters were the first to react. The 3 of them exclaimed in surprise, "Duque?" That's right. They and the other heroes all saw Duque. That's right, after going through so many ups and downs, Duque had long become the backbone of the entire alliance. This guy, who was constantly making his presence known during times of peace, was the core of the core during times of war. When they couldn't see him, everyone felt a sense of unease. Now, almost the instant they saw Duque, everyone's hearts calmed down. "Where's Kel? Is it?" Magni was unhappy. Duque curled his lips and pointed at a pile of silver-white ashes on the ground. If the ashes that emitted a faint holy light and frosty aura couldn't tell anything, then the magic accessories that Kel, Thuzad wore on the pile of ashes could definitely tell the truth. "You destroyed Kel, Thuzad?" Sylvanas was still a little unsure of what was going on. "You don't believe me?" Duque shrugged. There was no reply. That hot kiss that almost burned Duque's lips was the best answer. Gavin Rad whistled. At this moment, a violent rumbling sound came. Only then did everyone turn back to look at the earth-shattering battle at the side. Actually, everyone didn't really ignore the Black Dragon Princess. It was just that everyone saw Onyxia pressing down on Saffron's dragon head with her claws and biting off his long tail at the same time. For a battle like this where the winner was already decided, everyone was a little uninterested. Roar! Saffron struggled with all his might. He furiously dug the ground beneath him. The beautiful floorboards were lifted up in pieces, revealing the black soil underneath. He even dug a large pit under his body, which was ridiculous. "Poor fellow, accept your fate." Onyxia laughed sinisterly, and with a leap, she dodged Saffron's attack. Then she rode on Saffron's back and bit the back of Saffron's neck. But everyone knew that it was over. At this moment, Duque flashed and appeared not far from Saffron. Onyxia had almost completely bitten off Saffron's cervical vertebrae, leaving only a little bit of connection. She let go and used her 2 front claws to press down on Saffron's skull and back. She yelled angrily, "Behave!" Originally, Saffron was still struggling with all his might. Suddenly he stopped. Because something that looked like a compass was emitting an aura that made his entire body stiffen. It clearly said, "I'm busy," in dragon language, but that did not stop Duque from changing the concept and using it as a flag. Clear dragon language flowed out of Duque's mouth. Lost dragon soul, wake up. I summon you in the name of Red Dragon Queen Alexstrasza of the Sleeping Dragon Temple. The simple compass had a typical dragon rule. Even though it was activated by Duque's somewhat unreliable fire divinity, the effect was not bad. It seemed that such a rule could devour all of Saffron's negative emotions and guide him to find his reason. Suddenly, an icy blue power began to flow between Saffron's gray bones. A dragon-shaped illusion appeared and wrapped around the dragon bones. With the dragon bones as the core, semi-illusory blue dragon skin began to cover the entire dragon skeleton. Psst. Saffron's soul? Kalia muttered to herself. Phew, Saffron surprisingly did not show any intention to attack. Duque waved his hand. Onyxia backed off a little, but she still stared at Saffron. Saffron, are you awake? Chapter 1286. Whoosh, whoosh. Alexstrasza's will, which had lost its controller and was lured here by Duque, suppressed its stubbornness, anger, and resentment. Saffron finally woke up from his confused state. What did I do? It was in Draconic. You were killed by Arthas, and then your soul and body were enslaved, Duque said as he used his mental power to remove the fog in Saffron's soul. There were some things that, once imprinted in the deepest part of one's soul, could not be completely erased from one's soul unless one completely destroyed it. Saffron suddenly roared, I remember now, that wretched Arthas. Bastard. %R $. The dragon's roar sounded like slang, but also like a meaningless syllable that vented anger. Anyway, the system elf translated it for Duque as a bunch of garbled code. In order to control this frost dragon, Arthas had suppressed Saffron's memories and sealed most of his soul and memories. Now that Thuzad was no longer there, Saffron, who had returned to his original nature, naturally lost his temper. Duque and the others were not annoyed, and just watched Saffron throw a tantrum. Finally, Saffron was done. Even with his once noble status, he had to lower his noble head at this moment, especially when Duque was still holding Alexstrasza's compass. He subconsciously believed that Duque represented the Dragonsleep Temple. How is the Dragonsleep Temple going to deal with me? Of course, Duque could not answer. Do you think you can return to the Dragonbone Wasteland? Every dragon that was about to die, or even after it died, its soul longed to return to the Dragonbone Wasteland to sleep forever. This was many times stronger than the genetic code that was imprinted in the deepest part of the gene. It was an instinct that could not be defied from the deepest part of the soul. But Saffron knew that he had lost that right forever. A fallen soul did not have the right to return to the Dragonbone Wasteland with his companions and ancestors. Of course, there was another way, which was to be nailed to the door of the Dragonsleep Temple as a sinful traitor like Nisario. That was not what Saffron wanted. Now, he was a completely ownerless, lonely soul. After saying the word 3 times, Saffron still couldn't continue. It doesn't matter if you're killed, or if you're forcibly enslaved with your soul and broken body. However, the killings and sins you committed when you were a frost dragon can't be completely erased. You need to atone for your sins, do you understand? Fraud Du patiently guided the blue dragon's soul, whose IQ had already dropped a little. Atone? How can I atone? Duque raised his chin slightly. After the Titans of the Pantheon conquered planet Azeroth, they handed over the responsibility of guarding the planet to the Pentashade dragons of the Sleeping Dragon Temple. Now, Azeroth was facing the invasion of the Burning Legion led by the traitor of the Pantheon, Sargeras, and the erosion of the ancient gods Sea, Thun, and other evil forces. All you have to do is carry out your duty as a guardian in a just war. You are the atonement. Duque's words made sense, and Saffron was speechless. He nodded his dragon head almost subconsciously. Duque snapped his fingers, and Onyxia obediently transformed into a human form and came to Duque's left side. Duque smoothly stroked her hair with his left hand. See the sky? She abandoned the evil alignment and fought for justice under me, the guardian of Azeroth, Duke Marcus. Now, Her Majesty Alexstrasza has promised that as long as she performs well, she will be accepted back into the Sleeping Dragon Temple in the future. At this point, Onyxia's body trembled. To be honest, she didn't care whether she could return to the Sleeping Dragon Temple or not. What she cared about was Duque's terrifying influence. Saffron's soul trembled violently, and he asked in a trembling voice, Can you speak to Her Majesty Alexstrasza? Coincidentally, Duque saw that the pointer of the compass had pointed to On Duty. Duque decisively put the compass on the ground and smashed a dragon language spell on it. It wasn't any advanced spell. It was purely to activate the communicator with the Red Dragon Queen. The next second, a unique pressure reverberated throughout the hall. When an illusory red dragon head with the height of a 2-story building was projected in the hall, everyone felt as if a long and distant cry rose in their hearts. This sharp cry came from the ancient times 25,000 years ago. It was a majesty that was filled with the sedimentation of history. She was the perfect combination of nobility, beauty, ferocity, and strength. The aftershock of her soul easily crashed into the depths of everyone's hearts. Everyone's hearts contracted due to their nervousness. After exhaling, their lungs forgot to expand and breathe in fresh air again. Everyone felt a little suffocated. However, Alexstrasza quickly retracted her aura. "Oh, it's Duque. Sorry, I just came from the Void battlefield," the queen replied casually. "What's the matter?" "It's about this guy you mentioned a while ago. I kicked her and asked how many merits she needs to return to the Dragon Slumber Temple." Duque first grabbed Onyxia's neck like a little chick and forced her to take 2 steps forward. Onyxia didn't dare to look directly at the queen. The queen's huge yellow eyes blinked. Although she didn't know why Duque would ask at this time, she still answered, "If we can successfully seal Thun this time, this merit will be enough. At least Nozdormu won't object. He has the most opinions right now." "Alright, the second thing. I just dealt with Saffron's soul. Can you help me inform Malygos?" Alexstrasza turned her head. She had obviously sensed Saffron's soul long ago, but she sighed now. "You shouldn't have asked me." Yes, she couldn't speak directly about the Blue Dragon army. Even Malygos didn't have many soldiers under him. After all, overstepping his authority was overstepping his authority. At this point, Saffron's expression couldn't help but become gloomy. At this time, Duque suddenly said, and I'm saying if I let Saffron make enough merits, can you consider letting his soul return to the Dragonbone Wasteland in the future?" The dragon race's way of dealing with the fallen was to kill them directly and then destroy everything with a dragon breath. Alexstrasza was a bit troubled by Duque's sudden suggestion. After all, Duque was also considering this from the perspective of the Dragon Slumber Temple. After thinking for a while, Alexstrasza finally said, "I hereby promise that if any of the fallen dragons choose to redeem themselves and make enough merits, I will initiate a motion at the Dragon King's conference. I will initiate a motion during the Dragon King conference. As long as I get more than half of the Dragon Kings agree, I will be able to let the lost souls return to Dragonbone Waste." Chapter 1287. The weight of this sentence was definitely as heavy as a mountain. It could be said to be the most important thing in her words. Duque was pleasantly surprised by the Red Dragon Queen's decision, but he was not surprised. This was the inevitable choice of history. It was a time of war, and war was bound to be accompanied by sacrifices. Dragons were indeed at the top of the food chain on planet Azeroth. However, their tragic fertility and long growth time meant that the dragon army would only get weaker and weaker in such a fierce war. As long as demons did not die in the Twisted Nether, their souls could theoretically run back and be resurrected indefinitely. Under such circumstances, finding ways to replenish their troops became the biggest issue that the Dragon Sleep Temple could not avoid. After killing Nisario, the 4-colored dragons had vented their hatred. However, under the situation of the Burning Legion's continuous attacks, the weakening of the protective circle due to the absence of the Earth Guardian, and the increase in casualties was also there. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been the decision to recruit Onyxia into the dragon's slumber shrine, and the fact that a fallen soul was allowed to return after redeeming itself. If it was the dragon sleep temple of the past, they would not have even thought about it. Rules were dead, and dragons were alive. Alexstrasza wasn't stupid enough to challenge the rules with her limited lifespan. Just like the Alliance later in history, Death Knights, Demon Hunters, and so on openly joined the Alliance camp. Now that the Red Dragon Queen had given an opening, if Duque still did not know how to behave, then he would have lived in vain. Since the Queen had given Duque a free hand, who would take advantage of it? Of course, it would be Duque. Yo, old dragon, you have a redemption scroll that is about to expire. May I ask if you want to use it? If you want to use it, please sign this indenture. Everyone could see that Duque was up to no good. However, no one could be jealous. Firstly, those who could sneak into the Alliance's hero squad were either kings or true heroes. Secondly, Duque's experience, status, and methods were not something they could imitate. Want to take a dragon as a follower? Sure. You could save the Red Dragon Queen first, or kill the Black Dragon King's entire family. Kill the males and take the females as mounts. If it was just a little bit off, perhaps some people would be envious and jealous. But if the difference was too great, then they could only worship him. At this time, Duque slowly walked towards the ashes left behind by Kel, Thozad's death. He reached in and fished out one of the biggest spoils of war. Yes, it was the contract scroll left behind by Nizul. The scroll had the inheritance of the Lich King's frost divinity. Oh, it's Alexstrasza. Can you do me a favor? Duque waved the scroll. On the huge red dragon's face, everyone could see the queen's eyes roll. F***CK, other than Duque, there was no one else who could take advantage of the Red Dragon Queen. However, since Duque had helped her redeem the soul of an important blue dragon, and Angela still needed to rely on Duque's intelligence for the rest of her plan, the queen decided to help him. A portal with a diameter of at least 10 meters appeared in the void. The next moment, a red dragon claw that could easily grab a steam tank reached out. The black dragon claw with a perfect arc reached forward and tapped lightly. A drop of exuberant green life aura entered the scroll just like that. Done. Then, the dragon claw retracted and disappeared without a trace. Others might think that Lich King Nizul's power was pure shadow element death energy, but that was not the case. He, who had long wanted to rebel, had intentionally or unintentionally used the frost element that was completely different from the Burning Legion's warlocks as his main power. But when it came to purifying this kind of old demon, it was better for Duque to borrow the hands of others. After all, holy power, moral integrity, and so on, Duque did not even have enough for himself. After purifying the shadow element, all that was left was the pure frost divinity. After casually saying a few words, the queen turned off the projection. Duque did not start absorbing the frost divinity on the spot, because that would be asking for death. Since ancient times, there had been all kinds of mages who crossed paths. There was the arcane ice element and the frost element, then the arcane fire element, the pure arcane element, and so on. But there were no idiots who played with fire and ice. It was not that it was absolutely impossible, but the problem was very big. The essence of ice and fire was in conflict. Whether it was the element itself or the various metamagic abilities, they were all opposites that fought to the death. Secondly, without the arcane circuit as a foundation, the endurance would be very poor. One could be a 3-element great mage of fire, arcane, and frost. Note that there was a prerequisite, and that was to have a sufficiently powerful arcane magic circuit as a buffer. Therefore, before mastering the arcane divinity, Duque did not dare to directly absorb the frost divinity. One had to know that the flame divinity in his body was produced by Ragnaros and was extremely violent. If he rashly absorbed the frost divinity of the Lich King, he might explode on the spot. In addition, why was it said to be one of the biggest spoils of war? Because there was another highlight. Duke took out the Tish, legendary guardian staff, from his storage space. Although it was already emitting a strong magical wave, it was still not systematic and always stirred up turbulence of magical power. Duke's heart was beyond excited. That's right. He had already sensed that the body of the staff was made of 40 fragments, plus the head of the staff itself. The last remaining part of this artifact staff, the staff's tail, was just 10 meters in front of him. There, at a glance, was an empty wall. Only the connection between the artifact parts told Duque that it was where Thuzad's treasure was located. Open! Duque waved the drumstick-shaped staff, and 3 translucent black crows appeared from the top of the staff. They flapped their wings through the phantom fog and circled above the treasure chest. A second later, the illusion collapsed, and every expert from the Alliance couldn't help but let out a sigh. The huge treasure chest with silver skull carvings made a clatter sound and opened by itself. An inconspicuous wooden thing flew out, drew a gorgeous blue-purple arc in the air, and finally deftly embedded itself at the end of the staff in Duque's hand. In the next instant, the artifact staff that Duque held high bloomed with a brilliant glow. Powerful arcane magic fluctuations surged out like raging waves. Even though it did not cause any damage to people, they still felt as if they were standing on a beach, being tossed up and down by a huge wave several meters high. They could not stand steadily at all. Wow! Gavin Rad's mouth opened wide enough to fit an apple. Boss, why do I feel like your artifact is much more powerful than mine? Unexpected things happened one after another. As if it was provoked, Magni's, Savra's, Hand of Ragnaros, the Balrog ignored its owner's will and burst out a blazing light, forming a fire pillar that would take 3 people to wrap their arms around it and burst into the sky. Chapter 1288. This pillar of fire didn't cause any damage, it was simply a demonstration of its unwillingness to be left out. Seeing that Magni, who had his mouth wide open, didn't even use God's descent, he knew. Without further ado, Theon's Ashbringer and Gavinrad's wind sword burst out with dazzling light at the same time. A blazing pillar of fire, a holy golden pillar of light, and a pillar of wind and lightning surrounded by lightning. In their own way, these 3 divine artifacts made a threatening declaration to the divine artifact staff in Duque's hand. The humming mixed with the light made everyone gasp in amazement. Soon, the winner of this divine artifact competition was decided. The radiance of Ish in Duke's hand grew brighter and brighter. The purplish-blue light became the only theme in this space. Even the frost around the hall was dyed red. At this moment, something happened that left Duque speechless. 3 black, translucent crows appeared again, making unpleasant caw, caw, caw. To put it nicely, it was a clear sound, but to put it bluntly, it was a pain in the ass. This reminded Du Mohan of the cartoons he had watched in his childhood. Whenever the time came to complain, there would be a black crow flying elegantly in the sky. As it flew, it would shout, "Idiot! Idiot! Idiot!" The drumstick was just that F*** ket up. It just so happened that this strange scene made a new development in the situation. With the crow's cry, Theon's Ashbringer was fine, but the other 2 divine artifacts suddenly withered. Was it because their souls had suffered 100,000 damage, and they couldn't even lift their heads, or was it something else? Well, to be honest, it really was spiritual damage. The powerful system ALF intercepted a telepathic transmission that was similar to a video transmission from Atish. As for what it was exactly, it couldn't be completely analyzed. However, there were 2 scenes that were certain. One was Duque leading a team to kill Ragnaros, and the other was Duque defeating the Wind Prince. This was clearly the drumstick's announcement. Your former masters were all defeated by my master, and your masters are all my master's subordinates. Alright. Duque was dumbfounded. He almost wanted to spread out the legendary brush and ink on the spot and write a word of admiration for Atish. Damn it, even though you're a godly staff at your level, you still know how to use data to slap people in the face. There's no one else like you. Seeing that the fire demon hammer and wind sword had admitted defeat, Atish let out an even more melodious crow caw. Quack, quack, quack. It was cheerful and hurried, looking for a beating. How arrogant! Duque swore that if this thing wasn't his divine artifact rod, he would definitely find a chance to dismantle it into parts. What was it again? Whoever likes it can take it. Teacher Duque, can I touch it? On the other side, Jaina had already run over. She clasped her hands tightly, and her eyes were already the standard starry eyes of a star chaser. She was acting coquettishly and cute at the same time. If it was someone else's artifact, she would be too embarrassed to touch it and study it. But as for Duque, as Duque's disciple and partner, he had special rights no matter what. No problem. Duque very straightforwardly handed over the drumstick. Of course, just in case he didn't let go. At the same time, he sent a strong thought to Atish. This is your master's chick, don't hurt her, or I'll dismantle you. Immediately, Atish sent back a thought. No problem, you and me, who's with whom? Something that left everyone dumbfounded happened again. Not only did Atish read Duque's memories and hum out the famous melody of Ode to Joy, he also made 3 illusory crows perch on Jaina's hands and shoulders, letting out low caws as if they were trying to please her. Their long curved beaks gently rubbed against Jaina's delicate face. Duque's mouth turned into a standard O shape on the spot. Damn it! Wasn't this the divine artifact passed down by Saint Medivh? How did it become so shameless? Was it really like its master? Kakik! Jaina laughed happily. Surprises came one after another. Suddenly, a large pop-up window popped up in the system, taking up almost half of Duque's field of vision. Your divine artifact, Atish, legendary staff of the Guardian, is transferring arcane divinity to the host. Do you accept? Duque was stunned for a full 3 seconds. What did it mean by, one can wear out iron shoes in fruitless search, but find it by chance without any effort? That was it. 20 years. It had been too long. So long that Duque had already forgotten that the drumstick's previous owner, Medivh, was also a demigod. That's right. Medivh was a demigod great arcanist with the title Astral Wanderer. He was also proficient in 3 elements, but he was most famous for spatial magic based on the arcana. Duque didn't expect much at all. He was already very happy to be able to gather Atish and get a divine artifact. Who knew that there would be additional divinity as the grand prize? Ha! Arcane divinity! Arcane divinity! I can become a demigod this time. Excitement, ecstasy, exhilaration. Duque didn't know how to describe his current feelings. 22 years. He had traveled to Azeroth for a full 22 years. From a worthless young man who had almost nothing to his name, who could be humiliated by any random noble, to the #1 person in the Alliance today, a super expert who was about to break through to the demigod level. Duque had gone through a lot of hardships. Thinking back on the many times he had narrowly escaped death, or rather, the painful experience of dying and coming back to life, Duque still felt that it was unbelievable. Humans were always unsatisfied. Or rather, desire was the driving force for humans to move forward. He had thought that it would be good if he could just muddle through life and not become a ghoul. He hated aging and longed for immortality. He didn't want to live forever and longed for power. What did he want? Wasn't it to live better? Perhaps, with great power came great responsibility. But so what? He was used to carrying the burden of the world's future anyway, so there was nothing to be afraid of. After all, with great responsibility came great benefits. So, everyone, what do? I'm so excited now. I want to kiss all of you. In the whisper of the wind, Duque said excitedly. Originally, his relationship with his lovers was kept a secret. Rumors were just rumors. If he didn't admit it publicly, no one could do anything to Duque and them. Although in theory, a few of the queens were already over 30 years old, with the eternal blessing, age had lost its meaning, and no one could say anything. At this moment, Duque was trying to stir up trouble and make everything clear. As soon as Duque said this, Jaina was the first to enjoy the benefits and kissed him without hesitation. So fragrant. Looking at the silver line connecting the lips of this so-called master and disciple, Gavin Rad was embarrassed. But this was just the beginning. Chapter 1289. Aurelia moved quickly. She was the second to pounce on Jaina the moment she finished kissing Duque. Her slender and muscular arms wrapped around Duque, and this time, it was a longer French kiss. The third was Sasha. She said in Duque's ear without hesitation, Congratulations in advance. If the first 3 candidates weren't surprising to others, then the last 3 would be shocking to the public. Lucia Barav, the Queen of Alterac, and Kalia Menethil, the Queen of Lordaeron, were a little shy. They held hands and gave Duke a light kiss, one after the other. Even Sylvanas, the Queen of Sindorii, made an apologetic expression at Riadaline before lining up to kiss her like a moth to a flame. What was most surprising was that after 2 seconds of hesitation, Tyrande, the High Priestess of the Night Elves, who was said to have dedicated everything to the goddess Elun, was at the end of the line. Tyrande's holy face revealed a cunning expression as she faced her royal and general teammates, who had been struck by lightning. She gestured for them to keep quiet. Shh. For the sake of being teammates, don't tell the Night Elves. As for the goddess, she knows. Fortunately, everyone here was a hardcore member of the Alliance. Also, as one got older, they matured a lot. Their mouths were all tight. Otherwise, if it was leaked, it would definitely be huge news that would shake the entire Night Elven race. Gavin Rad was first surprised, then envious, and finally pounded his chest. He almost turned into a member of the FFF team and burned Duque and the others. Damn it. Should we celebrate our victory and show off our love? Half of the beauties in the hero team belong to you. Do I still want to live? Theon patted Gavin Rad's shoulder. Yo, don't forget, you're a paladin. Gavin Rad said bitterly, don't worry, I'm envious at most. I won't be jealous. He turned and ran over. Boss, teach me Cannon Girl's godly skills, okay? On the other side, Riadaline also smiled bitterly. Well, the Queen of the Alliance has been taken by Duque. Let's see how Duque deals with this. Aurelia hugged Duque and whispered in Duque's ear, I heard that once you become a demigod, your soul will stabilize. If that's the case, I want to have a monkey with you. Give birth to a monkey. Aurelia had learned this from Duque. Hearing this, Duque could only smile bitterly. I haven't become a demigod yet. I heard it's very dangerous. We believe that you will succeed, the 3 Windrunner sisters said in unison. If it's monkeys, I want them too. Sasha added weakly. Seeing the envious looks on the faces of the other queens, Duque could not help but laugh. Aurelia and Sasha did not have a crown to wear, so they naturally did not have that many taboos. The queens, on the other hand, were in trouble. As queens, it would be hard to explain if someone died without a formal wedding. Children. I'll talk to Elun and see if we can create a child of the gods, Tyrande said as if she was talking to herself, but it was no different from pointing out a slightly exaggerated path for them. The secular world did not allow polygamy and multiple queens. If a demigod was not enough, what about a true god? Any being who entered the divine realm would definitely have a transcendent status. Actually, Duque only needed to enter the divine realm and become a demigod, and that would be enough. Whoosh. We'll talk about that later. Let me see my divine staff. Duque held a tish in his left hand, and a series of data appeared in his vision. System detection frowny face Atish, legendary staff of the Guardian, level 6 divine staff, limit. Level 9 staff for the Azeroth Guardian. Its previous owners were Aegwynn and Medivh. Aegwynn once killed Sargeras in a duel. Although it was part of an act, Aegwynn did cause considerable damage to Sargeras' soul and body, causing Sargeras' incubation period to be longer than expected. In addition, in the Battle of Karazhan, Medivh used its power to destroy the staff and sent Sargeras into the bottomless abyss. Atish, soulbound to Duke Marcus. 130 to 244 damage speed 2. 90, damage per second 64. 4, plus 31 endurance plus 32 intelligence plus 24 spirit durability 145 up to this point. Atish's data was still the same as in Duque's memory. But from there on, things took a turn. Atish, legendary staff of the Guardian, Guardian special effect 1, space lock. Any existence that enters the world of Azeroth will have nowhere to hide in front of you. You can ignore space barriers, increase the chance of your spells hitting the enemy by 100%, and increase the damage and healing effect by 2,000 points. Guardian special effect 2, Arcane Dominator. all friendly members within a radius of 300 yards have a 20% chance of dealing a fatal blow with damaging spells. Increase the range by 200 yards, and increase the damage and healing effect by 100 points. Guardian Special Effect 3 Astral Wanderer. Within the range of the planet Azeroth, you can open intercontinental teleportation doors with 1/10 of the normal magic power required. The number of teleportation doors, their carrying capacity, and the magic power required to maintain them depend on your understanding of space coordinates. Outside of Azeroth, you can complete more than teleportation with 1/5 of your magic power. For any form of space barrier, your chance of cracking it increases by 20%. Guardian's Special Effect 4? After reading it in one breath, Duque was overjoyed. If it was the Atish in the game, it could only be regarded as the glory of the Molten Core in this level 60 era. Although it was rare, even looking at the entire national server, there were only 1167 players who had it, but after all, it was not the only one in the world. After coming to the real world, he now had the blessing of the Guardian Halo. Chapter 1290. After all, the previous system notification said, if you can absorb more elemental divinity, the power of the divine sword will be greatly increased. Now, it was strongly recommended to come back after leveling up. There was only one explanation. Injecting it after leveling up would be more beneficial to Duque. If Duque was still in a slightly confused state before, now Duque had completely understood that the time to break through to demigod had come. As long as he finished up the work in Naxxramas, with Atish, Duque was now a genuine guardian of Azeroth. If there was anything different between him and the previous guardians, it was that he lacked the demigod magic that was infused by all the members of the Tirisful Council. That wasn't important. As long as he broke through to demigod, everything would be solved. Duke lifted Atish gently and immediately felt that his arcane magic circuit had increased by more than 200%. The surging magic power reverberated in the huge circuit formed by the connection between himself and the divine artifact staff. If Duke, who was a third-class Breaking Dawn, was able to produce large rivers and lakes of mana every second, he would feel like he was in the middle of an ocean right now. Duque turned to face the soul of the ice dragon and said loudly, "Sapphiron, I ask you, are you willing to be under my command and become my exclusive elemental emissary? Fight to protect the world of Azeroth, wash away your sins, and achieve the ultimate goal of returning your soul to the Temple of Dragonsleep?" There was nothing to think about. Sapphiron, who was in soul form, lowered his proud head. "I am willing." Duque didn't say anything else. He raised his staff high, and a beam of blue light shot towards Sapphiron's huge soul. Like silk being spun from a cocoon, everyone vaguely saw countless black threads being drawn out of Sapphiron's soul and dissipating in the air. Then the frost aura in the entire hall began to gather on Sapphiron's spiritual body. A series of sizzling sounds rang out. Under Duque's extraordinary magic power, not only Sapphiron, but even the hall they were in felt like it was being frozen. It was just that one was coming out and the other was coming in. As the entire space began to become illusory, Sapphiron's soul began to materialize. The ugly white bones were covered by muscles formed by the condensation of elements. Then, a dragon skin as white as snow appeared out of thin air. 10 seconds later, there was one less fallen bone dragon in the world, and one more elemental dragon that was transformed from the purest frost element. From this moment on, Sapphiron became an elemental creature similar to the fire phoenix. After dealing with Sapphiron, it was time to split the loot. The Alliance heroes quickly and simply picked out the epic equipment that they wanted. Of course, Naxxramas' equipment was only at level 80. The rest of the equipment was equivalent to level 60 in the game, so the 15 of them were not interested in it. They would probably leave it for William and the rest. On this day, in the Cenarian fortress in the north of Silithus, the battle was still at a stalemate. Although the Allied forces had gathered the elites of the Alliance, the Horde, and the Dragon race, they were still unable to push the battle to the wall of beetles in the middle of Silithus, let alone the temple of An-Kuraj. Grom Hellhowl, who was covered in mud, was covered in green and yellow. These were the body fluids of the insects. After solidifying, not only did they emit a foul smell, but they also looked very funny. Lord Howl, who had retreated to the fortress, could not help but complain to Thrall, "Great Chief, how long are we going to defend? If we really can't, we can form an assault team and destroy some damned insect nest first." Thrall did not answer directly. Instead, he asked, "How many elites do you think the Horde will sacrifice to achieve this goal?" Lord Howl was stunned. His expression was one of unwillingness at first, but then it turned gloomy. Although the Horde had brought tens of thousands of people this time, they did not even need to compare it with the thousands of elites who had attacked Blackrock Mountain. Just by looking at the old and the young, one could tell that this Horde army was just for show. It was now the 7th year of the westward expedition. It was far from enough for the new generation of orcs to grow up. Those 5- or 6-year-old children would need at least 10 more years before they could barely fight. There were only 100,000 orcs in the westward expedition. After the conflict with the Night Elves in Grey Valley, the Burning Legion's invasion of Mount Hyjal, and the latest battle with the beetles, it could be said that almost all the orcs who could fight were here. Without the support of the Tauren, trolls, and goblins, the Horde would not even be able to gather 100,000 troops. The Tauren had never been a race with a large population. To be able to bring out 5,000 soldiers was already the result of Kane's full support. Wajin's Darkspear clan was also a branch of the trolls. 10,000 soldiers was the limit. If this army was all lost here, then the Horde did not need to say anything. If the Alliance turned against them, they would have to destroy themselves here. This time, the Horde's territory was the most directly affected by the swarm of insects. If the Alliance was ruthless enough, they could wait until the Horde's warriors were all killed, and then come to pick up the spoils. The Alliance was also suffering from internal and external problems. For them to be able to bring out so many troops so quickly, everyone in the Horde with a bit of brains felt that the Alliance was very generous. Although the situation was not good, the stupid insects would not learn to intercept the Alliance's supply railway. With the continuous flow of firearms, the battle-loss ratio was still very eye-catching. Often, the death of 100 giant insects taller than the orcs was the sacrifice of one Alliance or Horde warrior. In a situation where the Alliance's priests were so powerful, as long as they were not beheaded on the spot and dragged to the rear, even if they were still breathing, they could be saved. Therefore, when Duque made it clear that they would wait until they dealt with Naxxramas or Zul'Gura before taking further action, Sal and Wajin raised their limbs and voted in favor. Not many people would die, and it would allow the young orc warriors to gain valuable combat experience. This kind of good thing did not happen every day. Other than the worry that after the Alliance and the Horde joined forces, it would increase the possibility of the Horde being annexed, there was nothing bad about it. Just as Grom was about to leave, Sal and the others suddenly heard a shrill cry. "Warning! There are army-level insects." Army-level insects were super-large insects that could only be killed by an entire army. Thrall and Grom turned their heads and saw the mountain-like beetle in the distance. Again? Damn it. There are more and more of these things recently. Grom spat fiercely, then picked up his bloodhowl and turned to leave. "Wait, let's go together." Army-level insects also meant the terrible vitality of the insects. Although the attack power of that thing was not too terrible, the giant beetle was basically immune to existing artillery fire. If it was allowed to rush to the edge of the fortress, it would undoubtedly greatly affect the line of defense. Once the line of defense collapsed, it would be filled with human lives. In the absence of the main force of the Alliance, the lives of the Horde warriors would naturally be filled. At this moment, there was a sudden roar of cannons from the clouds. Obviously, it was a terrifying cannon that far exceeded all the cannons in the Cenarian fortress. One shot overturned the army-level giant insects. There was Duque's laughter in the air. Looks like we made it." Chapter 1291. Giant ships, cannons, countless men's dreams. Sal and the tribal warriors looked up at the sky. At first, they thought it was another flying ship like the Skybreaker. Obviously, they were wrong. It was flying, yes, but it was not a giant ship, but a huge fortress. No one would forget the terrible figure that once wreaked havoc in the main cities of the major races. In the eyes of many ignorant tribal people, it was almost a scourge. It was boundless, floating in the sky, and there was no way to fight it. Every person could only hide in the main city with the strongest defense, trembling, listening to the terrible wail of death lingering in the sky, waiting for the judgment of extinction to come. Cannons couldn't hit, magic couldn't reach, and the two-footed flying dragons that were sent out would only be brutally wiped out by gargoyles more than 10 times their number. Every tribal warrior still clearly remembered the humiliating days when they could only be beaten in pain and unable to fight back. Now, what was this? Directly south of Cenarian Fortress, Naxxramas slowly descended from the sky. It swooped down violently, sweeping away large swathes of clouds, and stood between the allied forces and the swarm of insects in an extremely domineering manner. It easily blocked the insects flying from the south. Above Naxxramas in the sky, there was still the terrible giant skull relief. But the shape was a bit like a roly-poly doll, with a square bottom and a conical top composed of 4 edges. The 4 corners of the fortress fluttered in the wind with the Alliance's blue background and golden border lion flags. Even though Naxxramas looked much more dilapidated than before, there was a very obvious big hole facing the north. This should be what the Alliance said in the report to the tribe, that it was blown up by the floating city Dalajan. Even so, Naxxramas was still a daunting fortress. Soon, the fortress opened fire. As soon as they arrived, they unleashed a barrage of bullets. Many of the insects were badly mutilated, and their broken bodies and limbs fell from the sky. Huh! Sal frowned immediately. Great Chief, you also noticed? Woken said, Yes. Naxxramas' firepower is much weaker than I remember. As soon as Sal finished speaking, he found that Jaina had come. That's because after the Alliance seized Naxxramas, they discovered that many of the shadow magic towers couldn't be used. Jaina's crisp and slightly intellectual voice was pleasant to the ear no matter the time. Sal did not know that because of Duze's appearance, his personal relationship with Jaina was destined to be 2 parallel lines that would never intersect. Seeing Jaina, who was supposed to be the core member of the assault team, appear in front of him so calmly, how could Sarn not know the outcome? Still, he asked in disbelief, did the Alliance really take over Naxxramas? Jaina nodded. Yes, the evil soul of the great Lich Kel, Thuzad, has been completely purified. From today onwards, the former Scourge stronghold, Naxxramas, belongs to the Alliance. Sal and other tribal chiefs have an indescribable feeling in their hearts. Once upon a time, they thought that by going west to Kalandor, they could get rid of the Alliance's control. As long as they could gain a foothold in this slightly barren land, they might be able to compete with the Alliance across the sea. If the establishment of Theramore was a nail in the hinterland of the tribe, and the Night Elves joining the Alliance was to further suppress the expansion space of the tribe, then this floating stronghold was obviously the scythe of death hanging over the tribe's head. Since the Scourge army could use Naxxramas to hang the major cities of the tribe, the Alliance could do the same. No, it could even be more than that. When the city of Duroder was first built, the tribe was very excited. At that time, the tribe's territory was also small. Who would have thought that Duque's arrangements were so far-reaching, attacking the new main city of the Orcs from the south and north? It was not obvious at first, but as the tribe continued to expand their settlements throughout the continent in order to compete for resources, they found that there was a noose around the tribe's neck, slowly strangling the tribe to death. The Alliance did not take the initiative to attack the tribe. After all, it was the insects that were slaughtering the people of the tribe. On the contrary, the Alliance still appeared in front of the tribe as allies and saviors. Oh, next, it's up to the Alliance. Sal answered and sighed. In fact, the situation of the tribe could be described in one sentence. People who do not think far ahead will have immediate worries. If they did not deal with the raging insects, there was no threat to the Alliance at all. In mid-air, the huge floating stronghold suddenly seemed to disassemble itself, and several huge decorations on the outer wall fell from the air. That is, Sal murmured. Jaina laughed. How could the Alliance want that kind of decoration again? At this time, everyone saw clearly that it was Naxxramas who threw down the large skull relief sculpture that was the size of 10 football fields from the outer wall of the upper half of the stronghold. Yes, the alliance was not pirates, nor was it the Scourge army. This kind of decoration that was meant to scare people, the alliance would definitely not use it. The huge stone sculpture smashed down from 1,000 meters high, and immediately there was a tremor in the mountains. Of course, the effect was also obvious. The stone sculpture that was 30 meters thick came crashing down, and in the eyes of the insects, the scene was like the sky falling down. The huge and seemingly endless shadow pressed down, and the insects in the middle had no place to hide and were crushed into meat sauce on the spot. Splat. The insect slurry that splashed out from the cracks of the broken stone sculpture was a full 10 stories high. On the stronghold 2,000 meters away, almost every Alliance soldier who witnessed this scene could not help but grit their teeth. Immediately, they let out the most enthusiastic cheers. Ha ha! Could kill those brainless insects. Long live the Alliance! Under the watchful eyes of the 100,000 Alliance soldiers on duty, Naxxramas moved again, slowly flying to the southeast of Cenarian stronghold. The two strongholds, one on the ground and one in the air, formed a triangle with each other. Naxxramas descended. Because the speed of its descent was very slow, even when it landed on the ground, it did not cause much shaking. It only flattened several large sand dunes. On the side facing the railway, the stronghold opened a super gate that was at least 20 stories high, and a ramp that was 30 degrees from the ground descended. Jaina laughed. The Alliance is going to arm the entire Naxxramas stronghold as a mobile base to advance the front line. Now, on behalf of the Alliance Commander Duke Marcus, I officially request the Horde to send about 2 clans of troops as the garrison of the stronghold. After that, Jaina showed Sal an official document written in both Orc and human common language, stamped with the seal of the Alliance Command. Chapter 1292. At this moment, above Naxxramas, Magni was desperately complaining to his subordinates. Not enough. Not enough. Not enough at all. Didn't we inherit the will of the great Duke Marcus, the destruction dwarves who boast that explosions are art? What's the use of this small water gun? When did we become the destruction dwarves? The orange-red bearded dwarf quartermaster, Derek Benksu, complained in a low voice. Answer my question, quartermaster. Magni roared. Sorry, your majesty, our ships are all full. Although the supplies have been transported to the major ports in the Eastern Kingdom, due to transport capacity, we are barely able to meet the daily demand for artillery shells. We are unable to bear the demand for large-caliber artillery shells. If your majesty has the ability to guarantee the daily consumption of 100,000 tons of artillery shells, I don't mind adding any type of artillery your majesty needs in the next shipment. Derek's neck was red as he angrily rebuked his king. Dwarves were like this. As long as they were in the right, they would fight to the end. Magni knew he was in the wrong and had nothing to say. He had been busy with God's Descent recently, and he really didn't know what the logistics situation was like. This was the inevitable drawback of modern warfare. Artillery had brought a whole new structure to Azeroth, which had always been dominated by cold weapons, stronger offensive and defensive capabilities. At the same time, it brought heavy pressure to the logistics. In the last battle of Mount Hyjal, because the route of retreat could be cut off at any time, it was more like a one-time deal. Supplies were done in one go. Anyway, the personnel and equipment were either dead or depleted, so there was no need to talk about supplies. It was different now. From the moment they settled in Cenarian Fortress, it was a tough defensive battle. The cost of destroying more than 1 million big bugs was the daily consumption of more than 10,000 tons of artillery shells. Even if all the long-distance ships in the Alliance that could cross the Endless Sea were used, the average capacity was only a little more than 5,000 tons. Even if Duque had the foresight to put several production lines of small-caliber artillery shells in Theramore, and the task of food supply was assigned to Theramore, the Night Elves, and the Horde. Almost all the transport capacity was loaded with munitions, but it was still not enough. As the bridgehead of the Alliance, Duque couldn't put the most expensive and cutting-edge production line there. What if someone smashed it or stole it? She wouldn't even have a place to cry. Derek reminded his king, "Your Majesty, 90% of the munitions warehouses in Tanaris's hot sand port are full of rats." Magni frowned. 2 seconds later, the shameless dwarf king laughed and ran to the communication center. Duque, we're out of ammo. Can you conjure some bread like magic potions?" On the other side, in front of the magic communication mirror, Duque rolled his eyes. "Why don't you ask me to summon an army of 100 million and directly destroy Thun? If it's possible, it's not bad too." Magni was shameless. Duque really wanted to curse, "What do I need you for? But I just got a tiche and I'm in a good mood, so I won't argue with you. Where is the place with the most ammunition?" Magni turned his head, and Derek immediately answered, "Menethil Port." Menethil Port was located in the Paladin Bay, north of Iron Furnace Castle. It was originally a garden-like port of Iron Furnace Castle, but it wasn't called that. In order to perfect the estuary of the dwarves' territory, Rotterdam almost exclusively helped the dwarves build this port. Hence, in order to commemorate the Menethil royal family, they named it that way. Now, the Alliance's industrial areas were mainly in the southern continent, and the specific functions were divided. According to the principle of proximity, Stormport was mostly used for transporting food and daily necessities, while the heavy industrial area was undoubtedly Iron Furnace Castle. Although in order to avoid being wiped out by the enemy, Iron Furnace Castle also transported a lot of munitions to Stormport through the underground railway of Stormwind City, and then loaded onto ships to be transported across the sea. Most of the munitions were still stored in Menethil Port. Faced with Magni's request, Duque scratched his head and finally nodded. "All right, I'll do it temporarily, but don't expect me to have free mana every day." With one order from above, the subordinates ran like crazy. In Cenarian Fortress, the Alliance army was in a complete mess. "There's an order from above, empty warehouses 1 to 10 in an hour." Originally, these warehouses were used to store ammunition. Now that there was a lack of ammunition, they were all filled with cannons and steam tanks that were either scrapped or waiting to be repaired. The group of dwarves blew their beards and stared, completely dumbfounded. There was only so much empty space in the relatively safe defensive circle of the fortress. Where were they supposed to move the things in such a short time? 1 hour. Not to mention tools, they couldn't even make it in time when there was a serious lack of steam cranes. Hence, a majestic scene appeared. A large group of dwarves either drove the deity's descent or pulled the tribe's warriors over to be strong men. In Menethil Port, the dwarves were originally very lazy. Apart from the sentries and patrols, the dwarves were so bored that they were bragging. It couldn't be helped. The Alliance's ships were basically very accurate. When there were no ships, no matter how many munitions the Iron Furnace Castle transported, they could only be thrown into the warehouse at the port. Suddenly, the Alliance's lieutenants rushed into the barracks. "Hurry, hurry." Alliance Commander Duke Marcus's direct order: prepare all the ammunition and large-caliber cannons stored in the warehouse within an hour. Bring them all to the square and wait for orders. The dwarves' quartermaster and logistics personnel were all dumbfounded. "So much. How do we transport it? There are at least 300,000 tons of cannon ammunition here. And that's not counting the ones stuffed on the road. Where did the Alliance get these new fleets? How would I know? Maybe the Alliance's strongest mages are preparing to open a portal." This dwarf lieutenant's words were like a prophecy. Right? He guessed right. Duque was going to open a portal directly. After the tens of thousands of people below were exhausted, Duque didn't care so much. He just held up a tiche and started working. Thinking back, this thing could only open a Karazhan portal and send people to Karazhan. Duque muttered to himself. Of course, as a good, pure, and lawful citizen, Duke would often use a tiche to open a Karazhan teleportation portal beside the teleportation portal that the other mages had opened to return to Ironstove Castle or Dalaran. Of course, as a good, pure, and lawful citizen, Duke knew that many of his party members were very talented in destroying the hearthstones that could teleport them home. He even put the two portals almost together. In the end, a bunch of people who didn't know the truth were bitterly sent to Karazhan in the wilderness just like that. Achim, it was purely a slip of my hand. You really can't blame me. Ha! No one would have thought that an evil priest could actually open a Karazhan portal. At that time, Duque was scolded quite a bit, but Duque was very proud. He had one of the 1167 Atish in the entire national server. Chapter 1293. At the side, Alicia watched as Duque fell into a state of reminiscence and almost drooled wickedly. Even Alicia, who was most agreeable to Duque, could not help but face-palm. Please, Duque, please pay attention to your image. If your image collapses, it will affect us, all right? Sorry. It did not matter what he looked like. Wandering around without knowing how bad he looked was a capital offense. Duque's expression froze. He was that sanctimonious fake king again. Oh no, he was that handsome commander of the Alliance again. After advancing to Breaking Dawn, Duque rarely chanted magic. Whenever he needed to chant, it would be a large-scale spell. The next moment, Duque's voice traversed space and time, echoing in the sky above Menethil Port and Cenarian Fortress at the same time. It seemed close, yet far. The chanting was filled with ethereal inspiration, as if Duque's voice did not come from the other side of space, but from the divine domain. The incantation for the portal was a magic incantation that every Radiant Moon Archmage had to learn. After countless generations of cuts and improvements, it had become unchangeable. O lost soul wandering the world, may the stars give you guidance. May the earth bear your burden. In the name of Duke Marcus, I open a bridge that connects heaven and earth, and turn the natural moat into a path. The incantation was the main point, but the series of spatial coordinates that appeared in his mind at the same time was the most important. For something like spatial teleportation, if one only needed to teleport between two places without any gap, then one only needed to remember the starting and destination coordinates. However, Azeroth was also a self-moving planet. To complete a continuous teleportation for a long period of time, one had to constantly change the spatial coordinates according to the planet's self-movement. Simply put, it required a series of absolutely correct spatial movement formulas. Any mistake would cause the teleporter to be beheaded at best, or disappear forever in a spatial rift in the worst. This was why teleportation often only happened between mages and major cities. Now, what Duque wanted to complete was definitely a great spell that could be recorded in the annals of history. On Duque's retina, a huge amount of data poured down. The system elf's prompts kept coming. Spatial coordinates loaded. Calculation of spatial variable formula completed. The coordinates have been tested 233,333 times. The error rate is infinitely close to 0. Self-examination complete. Begin teleportation. Open portal 1 to 128. That's right, Duque was just that awesome. What he couldn't do in the past, Duque could now easily do with the help of the divine artifact Atish. Of course, with his limit, it would not be a problem for him to open 1024 portals at the same time. Considering the continuity and risk involved, Duque decided to be very safe and open 128 doors first. In the open space of Menethil Port, the Dwarven logistics troops were all stunned as if they had seen a miracle. They stared at the desert world and the magnificent elven-style fortress on the other side of the portal, completely speechless. All of the dwarf's flattery and speech were stuck in his throat. What are you waiting for? Do not increase the burden on Commander Marcus. On the fortress side, the dwarf quartermaster Derek's angry voice finally woke up the dazed guys on the other side a little. The dwarves immediately shouted and began to hurriedly send the munitions boxes through the various portals along the makeshift conveyor belt. Be careful, idiots. Even if there is shock absorption equipment inside, if it accidentally explodes, it will blow us all up into the sky. The third team. First transport the 155mm ones. The cannons on the other side have priority in resupplying ammunition. Before starting, every field officer had given a death order to the lieutenant below. the lieutenant gave a death order to the non-commissioned officers. Most of them very cordially conveyed to their subordinates, such as, "The cannonballs that can't be transported will be stuffed into your mouth," so none of the dwarves dared to be lazy. In addition, Deity used a projection to mark the remaining time on each portal, which made every dwarf move more quickly. In the Cenarian fortress, the tribe was also shocked to the point of being completely speechless. Could such a large-scale teleportation really be done by mortals? Sal's body leaned slightly to the left, and a ghost-like shadow appeared beside him, the former Sun King, now the leader of the forgotten, Anastrian. As a newly promoted tribal leader, Anastrian put his position in the right place, at least it looked like this. He covered his left chest with his right hand and bowed slightly. "I can't do it." At most 3 portals of the same level, each delivering 50 fully armed tribal warriors, is already the limit, and the consumption of magic gems is massive. If the Well of the Sun was still in my hands, then it would be 10 portals at most. Wajin asked in a low voice, "Aren't you all Breaking Dawn archmages?" Anastrian's mouth was bitter. "In terms of rank, I'm not much different from Duke Marcus. But his talent in the field of multicasting is above me. The key is that my thieves saw that he inherited the divine staff of the previous guardian, Mediv. The legendary astral staff that can break through space. Atish, the legendary staff of the guardian?" Sal muttered to himself, and the bitterness in his voice became even stronger. Although he didn't know what price Deity had to pay for such a large-scale teleportation, it wouldn't be too light, but it definitely wouldn't be too heavy, otherwise no one would be able to afford it. Even so, the Alliance's epic-making supply method had already made the Horde look up to it. If it was just the flying warships, the Horde still had a chance to imitate and catch up, but the flying fortresses and large-scale teleportation made Sal completely despair. This was already something that had nothing to do with the technology tree or talent. Unless the tribe was lucky enough to dig up another floating fortress left behind by the Titans and get their hands on a space staff that was close to Atisha's, not to mention that they had complete trust in Anastrian and were not afraid of her betrayal. Damn, there were so many ifs, and if they could all be done, it would be a miracle among miracles. The reason why miracles were called miracles was because they were basically impossible to happen. Sal's heart was heavy. In fact, this was Sal thinking too much. In the original history, during the period of the King of Draenor, the Alliance and the Horde jointly attacked Draenor, which did not explode. It was in the Moon Shadow Valley that the Alliance quickly built a huge fortress almost from nothing. What did they rely on? It was by relying on the portal. A large number of soldiers and craftsmen came from the huge portal. Materials such as wood and stones were locally obtained, but craftsmen and key alloy parts were all transported from the major cities of the Alliance across planets. In that era, cross-space supplies and strikes had long since become commonplace. It was just that Deity had realized it earlier. As for the Horde's strong minds suffering 100,000 points of critical damage, Deity said he would not take the blame for this. Chapter 1294. The Dalajan could also fly, but the Dalajan was the capital of a country. It wouldn't be good if it was damaged on the front lines. If the mage towers in the outer perimeter were to be destroyed, the Novice Mage Training Institute in the center would be damaged. Forget about whether Luo Ning, who had died somewhere, would be furious when he returned. Duke would definitely be heartbroken. Right now, Dalaran was his backyard and a training ground for talents. So whether it was attacking or defending, Naxxramas had to go first. As the strongest offensive fortress in the Alliance, if it didn't have tens of thousands of cannons, how could it satisfy the vanity of Duke, who was a proponent of cannons and ships? But it wasn't easy to rebuild the flying stronghold. If there was anyone to blame, it was Deity's fault for tormenting Naxxramas too thoroughly. First, he let the Dalajan give it a shot, then it fell from the sky into on Karaj, where the bugs almost tore it apart. In the end, Deity gave up a few areas in order to clean it up. Naxxramas was now empty inside. Many places were hollow, and who knew how long it would take to rebuild? But the Alliance didn't have the time to do this. Deity could only use the system to calculate the balance and install cannons on the stronghold first. Balance was very important. Whether it was a ship or a plane, it had to be calculated before departure, otherwise it would overturn. With the plague area almost completely destroyed, the weight of the cannons was a huge project. Fortunately, Duque had the system elf to help him calculate. It took a full 3 days for the dwarven craftsmen to work overtime, almost without sleep, to help Naxxramas install about 2,000 cannons and prepare about 50,000 tons of shells. Although 50,000 tons was a lot, before industrialization, the dwarven things were all thick and hard. It wasn't much to use. But it's enough for now, Duque concluded. In the command hall of Naxxramas, there was a sudden uproar. When do we attack? The one who asked was Lord Rorgrum. For the brave orcs, they had only been defending and not attacking for a while. Moreover, the few huge bug nests in the Silithus region were the biggest scourge. As long as the worm nest was not destroyed, the worm queen inside would be able to continuously produce a large number of large worms and cause trouble everywhere. These destructive bugs, or bugmen, were absolutely terrifying. They didn't mind meat or vegetables, and anything that could be called a living creature could be their food. The vultures in the sky, the scorpions and snakes in the desert, and even the cacti could be their prey. Just like that, the queen of the swarm unscrupulously replenished her nutrients, and then gave birth to 4-digit eggs every day. In less than 10 days, a new batch of giant insects would emerge from their cocoons and continue to wreak havoc everywhere. Therefore, destroying the hive was imperative. Faced with Master Howl's question, Duque pondered for a moment and said, "The day after tomorrow. I'll greet the dragons first." Duque didn't notice, or perhaps Duque intentionally or unintentionally saw a pair of eyes filled with hatred because of the words, "the day after tomorrow." Compared to the tribes whose homes had been destroyed, there was a leader of the Alliance who hated these worms even more. But ever since he arrived at Cenarian Fortress, nothing was up to him. He was Fandral Staghelm. Having lost his son, he was eager to attack the swarm, but Tyrant held him down tightly, forbidding him and his elite druid troops from leaving the fortress to attack before the main force returned. In the end, he even hated Duque. Now that Duque was attacking from the rear in order to reorganize, it made him grit his teeth even more. But Duque ignored him. He let Magni discuss the deployment of troops with Thrall, while he used the compass to find Alexstrasza. "So, Your Highness, are you worried about the big trash in the void?" The remains of the burning legion's warships. The Red Dragon Queen's eyes lit up in the magic mirror. The continuous battle in the void had caused great losses to both sides. The dragons dead had their companions collect their corpses and send them back to Dragonbone Waste to be buried, but the large number of space warships used by demons became a headache. If it was the corpses of demons, the dragons could use their powerful bodies to ram through them, but the harder and larger wreckages could not. And as the number of wreckages increased, the dragon's ability to find enemies decreased. Alexstrasza's interest was piqued when Duque suddenly mentioned the big trash. "Hee, what good suggestion do you have?" "Let's hear it." No one knew what Duque discussed with the queen. Anyway, the day of the army's deployment was fast approaching. Door of Darkness 22, March 18th, 8 a.m. Uncharacteristically, Duque wasn't in charge of the Alliance's main attack this time. The commander-in-chief was Magni, the cannon maniac, while Thrall and Tyrande were in charge. Outsiders might not understand, but those familiar with the Alliance knew that under Duque's guidance, the Alliance had long since abandoned the medieval style of warfare. Now, as long as the conditions allowed it, they would use their cannons to bombard everything that could move within their field of vision. No, today was a little more special. Standing on the platform that Naxxramas had specially opened up, looking down at the ground 3,000 meters above the ground, it was a strange feeling. This height had long surpassed the height that flying insects could climb. What was a beating up? This was a beating up. Thrall's eyes narrowed. He could already see the outcome of this battle. This was like using cannons to fight primitive people. It was just that unreasonable. "All right. Your Excellency Tyrande Whisperwind, since Duque has left the opening to you, my little fellows and I will watch the show first." Magni gave up the main position. "Thank you, Your Majesty Bronzebeard." Tyrande didn't stand on ceremony and stood in the middle. Time was up. Tyrande raised her head slightly. Her clear eyes seemed to emit two sharp rays of divine light. It pierced through space, through the clouds, and looked straight into space. A second later, Tyrande's long green hair suddenly started to flutter even though there was no wind. She only wore a golden bracelet, and her well-developed arms were raised high, revealing the beautiful lines of her muscles. She focused all of her attention, as if she was searching for something and guiding something. She shone brightly, and under Elun's divine power, the clear sky suddenly darkened. The sun and clouds seemed to have disappeared, and everyone could suddenly see the stars in the sky. Above the atmosphere, a void battleship that had been broken for who knew how many years was being pulled by several ancient dragons was changing its orbit, falling from the planet's synchronous orbit into the designated route. Soon, in the pitch-black void, a long line of fire lit up the entire defense area of the dragon aspect. Even in the midst of patrolling, the soaring dragons still turned their necks to look at that bright red. Chapter 1295. Rumble. The entire atmosphere rumbled. Even if the officers repeatedly warned the soldiers below, even if these soldiers were not new recruits, after seeing this scene and listening to the terrifying sound in the sky, the soldiers were still restless. In the sky above Silithus, a bright line of fire suddenly appeared from the sky. When the line of fire was imprinted in Thrall's resolute eyes, no one could see Thrall's expression. He still held the semi-divine weapon, Hammer of Destruction, tightly, but this famous weapon seemed to be not worth mentioning in the face of the terrifying attack that was about to happen. Thrall seemed to be in deep thought, and his green face seemed to be much paler than before. The golden light descended from the sky and was reflected in the deepest part of the eyes of every Alliance soldier. It seemed to be a long parabola drawn from the distant realm of the gods. Under the continuous gestures of the elven high priest, it turned into a stream of light from far to near. Everyone subconsciously turned their heads so that their eyes could follow the light. The golden light left a long afterimage in their field of vision, and it hit the ash insect nest directly north of Cenarian Fortress. It exploded with a loud bang, like a dazzling flower blooming with golden flames. It was 50 stories tall, and it looked like a gigantic insect tower made of solid rubber, but it collapsed with a single strike. Not only that, the entire insect nest couldn't withstand this sky-high attack at all, and there were signs of subsidence. The insect army guarding the insect nest was lifted up by the huge flame shock wave, thrown away, and dismembered into countless pieces, finally falling like raindrops. Within a diameter of a kilometer, it was full of flames, and the smoke and dust even swept up to 5,000 meters away. Wow! Magni whistled loudly. At the same time, almost all the Alliance soldiers on the cannons and portholes of the fortress who witnessed this scene let out fiery cheers. Haha. Good job. Burn these dog bugs. Burn, burn, burn. Burn them all. Although they didn't suffer many losses in the past few days, they were surrounded and attacked by dozens of insects, and their defense line was broken from time to time. Now, seeing one of the leaders of the Alliance, Tyrande, use such a powerful starfall, every soldier couldn't help but be excited. Who didn't want to have a powerful boss? Who didn't want their boss to stand up bravely at a critical moment, break the balance, and win? Unknowingly, every night elf looked at Tyrande with eyes full of worship. It's not like Tyrande can use such a powerful starfall. Fandral Staghelm gritted his teeth. He was right. Of course, Tyrande didn't have the divine power to summon such a large meteorite fragment. This was the wreckage of the Void warship that Duke had the Dragon Clan drop at the designated time and place after he had calculated the angle of incidence with the system. Since it was a fragment, its irregular shape would naturally cause all sorts of accidents when passing through the atmosphere. But that wasn't important. Tyrande, who was used to starfall, even with Elun's help, even if she didn't have the power to pull such a large floating object out of its orbit, she could still use Elun's divine power to guide the target to where she wanted it to go. This was an incomparably accurate strike. Of course, the higher-ups wouldn't tell the people below what was going on. The night elves knelt on the spot, all prostrating themselves to Tyrande, the incarnation of goddess Elun. In their eyes, this was a miracle that Elun had personally performed. In terms of power, this was indeed a miracle. One more wave, and the divine power that the goddess has bestowed upon me will be used up. After that, I will need to rest for at least a week. Following Duque's plan, Tyrande lied without batting an eyelid. In fact, this wasn't just to guard against the Horde, it was also to guard against possible spies in the Alliance army. Also, clusters of starlight continued to rise from Tyrande's body into the sky. As if responding to her twinkling starlight, a golden curtain of light slowly descended from the sky. It was like countless small suns that had fallen into the mortal realm. It was accompanied by Tyrande's melodious and mysterious incantation. They arrived in the blink of an eye. Like a rainstorm in May, they landed within the range of the ashworm nest. Rumble. Under the acceleration of gravity, the warship fragments became the most terrifying weapons of destruction. They tore through the sky and crashed into the worm nest with terrifying kinetic energy that no one in this era could understand. Not only did they cause the most terrifying massacre, but they also caused earth-shattering destruction. With the naked eye, everyone could see that the entire worm nest was collapsing. It wasn't just 1.5 meters, but a huge hole that was as high as a 10-story building. Finally, Starfall was over. Tyrande collapsed as if she had lost all her strength. Tyrande! Sasha, who was beside her, reacted quickly and caught her. She really did collapse. However, only she, Duque and Elun knew that this was far from her limit. She didn't use Elun's power to replenish her stamina. Good work. Now, it's time for the dwarves to perform. Magni bowed slightly, then stood on the main seat and shouted, "Kids, use the white phosphorus bombs, incendiary bombs, and heavy oil bombs." 2 minutes later, the rumbling of cannons could be heard throughout the flying fortress. The ashworm lair was already on fire. After all, the falling meteors weren't real fire elemental attacks. Now that they had enough ammunition, the dwarves turned the entire worm nest into a sea of fire. Speaking of which, if these things were used on humans, it would definitely be insane. For example, if the white phosphorus bombs burned a person, they could burn through the skin all the way to the bones. It felt like it was comparable to the skinning spells of the Calamity Army. If it was used on insects, who cares if they die? Only dead insects are good insects. Understand? The furious cannons continued for a full hour. After firing off over 10,000 tons of cannons, the beastmen were already numb to the sound of shells retracting, not to mention the continuous sound of cannons. Fortunately, they had given out earplugs early on. Otherwise, all of them would have become deaf. Until noon, when the Alliance and Horde mages used large-scale magic formations to cast war-level spells and extinguish the fire with frost, it was finally the infantry's turn. Go! We need to find the queen of the worm nest. We just want her corpse. The infantry of the allied army, who had been holding back for so long, finally had a use. Chapter 1296. Where was Duque when the Alliance army was in full swing? Duque quietly went to Lordaeron and then returned to Karazhan. At the highest level of Karazhan, which was also the most central position of this unique space. The decorations left by the previous master, Medivh, had been replaced. Duque sat on a throne condensed from arcane energy. The throne behind him was like the roots of a tree. Arcane energy, like electricity, connected every room in Karazhan, as if it was sucking magic from every corner of the entire mage tower. Under Duque's feet was like a huge piece of transparent glass. He could see the hundreds of libraries below, which were filled with millions of magic books. Duque sitting here was more like an extension of the magic knowledge, except that he happened to be sitting on the spire that symbolized supreme knowledge. Unlike the dominance and arrogance of other kings, Duque was filled with a kind of majesty that symbolized mysterious power. He was motionless, like a statue. His deep gaze crossed time and space, staring at every corner of the mage tower. The Einherjar guarding the entrance of the gate, the Einherjar attendants preparing to welcome guests in the arched hall that towered like the sky, the Saintess of Chastity waiting for the enemy at the end of the arcade, the curator who was vigilant in the library, the depths of Duque's eyes were like the well of eternity that constantly produced magic, or like the endless sea that could condense terrifying whirlpools. The spiral-shaped magic waves made him even more mysterious. Under the throne, several beings of different shapes and forms expressed their respect in their own ways. Majordomo Executus, the fire demon manager from the Molten Core, put his right claw on his left chest and bowed slightly. Opposite him, the frost elemental dragon, Sapphiron, who had just been redeemed by Duque from Naxxramas, bowed its noble head. Farina, the black witch, who exuded a shadow aura, wore a white gauze evening dress. It seemed that she didn't want to give Duque a bad impression. This white gauze dress was quite conservative, with a high neckline and nothing revealing on the chest or back. She stood there in the most ladle-like posture. If it was in the past, she might have had some unnecessary thoughts, but ever since she had the existence of the person standing opposite her, she didn't have any other thoughts. She couldn't think of anything. That's right. That person was an existence that everyone in the human kingdom knew about. The former Archbishop of Holy Light, Alonso's Fail. If he had a choice, Duque did not want to disturb this great saint's rest. But Duque had no choice but to do this, because he only had shadow. Without the holy elemental emissary, he would most likely be finished. Originally, Alonso's would not be able to rest in peace. During the Scourge invasion, the plague infected the lands of Lordaeron. From Alonso's Fail's grave, a mindless zombie was born. At first, it was just an accident. Even the generals of the Scourge didn't realize that there was such a guy in the Scourge. However, as time went by, Alonso's regained his consciousness. He hid and searched for the survivors of the Rotterdam kingdom. Kalia Menethil, the last living member of the Rotterdam royal family, was found and protected by Fail. He also established a secret sect to observe the situation of the war in Azeroth, and even recruited members from the Forsaken. For a long time, Kalia and Fail hid in Lordaeron. Until Willin, who was one of the three leaders of Eridar, along with Kill, Jaden, and Archimonde, came to Azeroth after rejecting Sardra's corruption. The two leaders of the Holy Light hit it off, and they formed a secret alliance to prepare for the future war between the Light and Dark factions. In this life, Lordaeron was recovered, and Alonso's grave, which Duque had been protecting, was not destroyed. Duque was able to summon Alonso's soul. If there is a shadow, there must be light. Otherwise, it will only gradually sink and fall. I hope that you can continue to guide me and continue to fight for the future of Azeroth. When Duque made this request, Alonso's Fail agreed to become Duque's Holy Light elemental emissary without hesitation. At this moment, looking at the Archbishop of Holy Light standing in front of her with a gentle and amiable smile, Farina felt as if she had been scolded by a dog. She had a premonition that if she dared to mess around, she would definitely have a hard time in the future. With a top-notch holy soul, Alonso's talent was unquestionable. However, there were too many existences with shadow souls. Even if Alonso's couldn't be replaced, Farina could be replaced at any time. Farina felt like crying. Next to Alonso's was the Redemption Knight Thaddeus, who had reverted to the appearance of a paladin. He no longer appeared in the form of a monster. His soul looked like that of a paladin, but instead of bursting out with crackling lightning, he was a natural element thunder knight. Unknowingly, Duque had gathered 5 elemental emissaries. However, everyone knew that there was at least one more. As a priest, holy and shadow were necessary. Similarly, as a mage, once they had fire and frost, all that was left was arcane magic. It was not easy to find a special soul that could contain powerful arcane magic and treat arcane magic as a life form. For a while, Farina sometimes thought maliciously that Ronin's disappearance was fake, and that Duque had actually killed Ronin and made him an elemental emissary. Fortunately, the Black Witch did not dare to say this out loud. Otherwise, Duque would definitely serve her with leather whips and candles. Cough, cough, torture. Fortunately, Duque had obtained such a powerful arcane magic soul almost at the beginning of Duque's rise to fame. The door of the hall opened with a loud bang. Under the gaze of the 12 Einherjar guards, a soul mage slowly walked in. Walking on the bright red carpet, his appearance could not be considered heroic, but he had a dignified air of a scholar. He wore a hood-like, Mind Union headgear, and a dark blue, Edwards wool, that complemented the complex elvish style. In his left hand was a red prismatic crystal, and in his right hand was a Nazresm soul blade that looked like a cluster of flames. On his back was a fiery red, secret ruby cloak that fluttered in the wind, and the ring of grim storm on his finger was shining. This gorgeous mage equipment was comparable to that of the main force of the Alliance's hero squad. In the original history, he would have been the one to shine brilliantly. Unfortunately, in this life, he was unlucky and was killed by Sargeras. But that was not important. After managing Karazhan for Duque for more than 20 years, he finally stepped onto the glorious stage of Azeroth. His name was Khadgar. Chapter 1297. Khadgar was supposed to be the third great mage who could destroy the heavens and the earth. In history, he would often single-handedly blow up bridges, block dams, and cause chaos to the iron horde that was created by the brainless roar that ran away. Looking at Khadgar's translucent face, which was still young because of his early death, Duque felt a little guilty. But this was fate. If not for Duque, perhaps he would still be as powerful as he was in history. Since Duque had taken over his fate and done better than him, Khadgar could only do so. If not for Duque needing an arcane elemental emissary to break through to the demigod level, Khadgar would probably still be a pitiful earthbound spirit in Karazhan. Managing the library and fighting the occasional invading monsters, this was Khadgar's unchanging life. His translucent spirit body was clad in solid cloth armor, and he did look a little out of place. Soon, this would not be a problem. Lightly putting down the magic weapon in his hand, Khadgar pressed his hands to the ground and made a standard bow. "Great Archmage, my lord Duke Marcus, your loyal servant, Khadgar, has come to pay his respects." The once young mage's voice was now filled with indescribable excitement. He had been dead for too long, so long that he had almost forgotten how it felt to be alive. This did not mean that he did not want to be resurrected. Not in the form of a filthy undead, but as some kind of life, to truly reappear in the world, just like his master, Medivh. Resurrection was the privilege of the gods. One had to at least step into the demigod level to have the right to discuss this issue. Now, in front of him was a chance to become Duque's elemental emissary and become an elemental creature, just like Batius and Alonso's. Sitting on the throne, listening to Khadgar's sincere greeting, Duque felt a strange sense of absent-mindedness. He felt as if he and Khadgar had been reversed. If Khadgar had not died, or if he, Duque, had been more capable 20 years ago and had discovered a cultivation method specifically for ghosts, would Khadgar have had a better life? But there was no point in making assumptions. Duque sighed softly. Since it was already like this in this life, there was no need for him to feel ashamed. "I've never seen such a shameless person before." "Yes, I've seen it today." Duque then put on a serious face and slightly raised his chin. "Khadgar, how many years have you served me in the form of a heroic spirit?" Khadgar lowered his head deeply. "It has been 22 years, my lord. All this time, I have been doing my best to fulfill the duties of a servant and help you protect Karazhan." Duque raised his right hand, and a pair of arcane palms appeared out of thin air, helping Karthika up. Khadgar stood up, still maintaining his slightly bowed posture. "Very good. I can see how loyal you are. I've always felt sorry for your tragic fate." Duque cleared his throat and continued, "I've always believed that the reason why people are noble is because they have the desire for knowledge, the desire to explore, and the courage to fight against fate. Tell me, Khadgar, are you willing to be a ghost mage forever?" Khadgar took a deep breath, even though this action was meaningless to a ghost. "If this is your will, my lord, I will accept it." The corner of Duque's mouth rose. Unknowingly, Khadgar had already learned so many ways to speak. Back then, he had still been a hothead. Perhaps this was what growth was like. Age and circumstances would always smooth out one's edges. Right now, I have a better and more dangerous choice for you. You can choose to become my arcane elemental emissary and help me control the power of the arcane domain. But the price is that from the moment you agree, you will become a special life form attached to me. If I die or fail to become a demigod, you will be like me, soul. Fly. Soul. Disperse. Do you understand what I've said? Faced with Duque's question, Khadgar nodded again and said solemnly, very clearly. That's right. If he maintained his current state, Duque would definitely let him continue to be the administrator of Karazhan. But so what? With Duque's immortal state, unless Duque died in battle, waiting for the next ruler of Karazhan was something that would never happen. If Khadgar could not even grasp this opportunity and did not have the courage to do so, how could he rise in the future? Without even half a second of hesitation, Khadgar raised his head and said in a clear voice, if this is the choice you give me, my lord, then I will choose to fight with all my strength. I hope to become a higher and stronger life form and help you, my lord. A smile blossomed on Duque's face. Very good. This is the Khadgar I know, the one who never lacks wisdom and dares to challenge himself. Duque stood up and slowly walked down the stairs made of the purest arcane energy. He raised his right hand, his palm facing Khadgar's forehead. Khadgar, what I am about to do is different from the other elemental emissaries. You know that. Arcane magic is the most basic and important core of the three elements of a mage. Thus, I will modify your soul so that your new form will be completely connected to my magic circuit. Your soul will be an extension of my magic circuit, and you will become the core commander of the other elemental emissaries. I'm not afraid to tell you that this process will be very painful. In a sense, to use an inaccurate analogy, if Duke was a complete iPhone and smartphone, then an ordinary elemental emissary would most likely become an existence equivalent to a power bank in normal times. They would help Duque communicate with the elemental realm, absorbing and filtering more elemental energy for Duque to use. However, Khadgar would become Duke's auxiliary chip, RAM, and power bank, a special existence that combined all of these functions into one. He would be able to use magic to attack enemies for Duque, but he would also be like a command tower. Duque would even give Khadgar a portion of the System Elf's computing power. Because recently, the System Elf had finally reached its limit. When calculating the trajectory of the warship wreckage in the atmosphere, Duque felt a wave of fatigue. Faced with Duque's physique, Khadgar's reply was resolute. I can endure it. Indeed, only someone as talented as Khadgar would be able to withstand this pressure. Then let's begin. Duque's palm lightly pressed against Khadgar's forehead. As his palm felt a slight chill, a large amount of magical information began to rush into Khadgar's sea of consciousness. Ugh! Khadgar let out a muffled groan. Chapter 1298. Everything in the world had to be done step by step, and Karthika didn't have extraordinary talent from the very beginning, directly becoming the world-destroying great master of true virtue. In history, Khadgar had inherited Mediva's legacy and spent more than 20 years to become a true powerhouse. In this life, Khadgar had died when he was still weak. Even though Duque had made him a heroic spirit mage after his death and had given him the right to read all of Karazhan's libraries, as well as the right to absorb other souls to strengthen himself, he had still lacked experience. That kind of life and death experience. Truthfully speaking, only a soul that had withstood all sorts of trials and tribulations and truly matured would have the soul strength that Duque needed for the elemental emissary core. The moment he touched Khadgar's soul, Duque knew that he was disappointed. Not enough. Far from enough. Khadgar's soul strength was barely on the level of a radiant moon mage. In the Alliance, he was only slightly better than mages like Gina Goldsword, and he couldn't even compare to Astromancer Solarian, who had joined Duque's side. The arcane energy that Duque had poured into Khadgar's body quickly reached saturation. It wasn't that Duque didn't want to pour it in, but that he couldn't. Even if Duque created new magic circuits for Khadgar on the spot, Khadgar's soul wouldn't be able to withstand these circuits. Duque's eyelids twitched violently. The problem now lay in front of Duque. Should he give up or find a new path? Khadgar's entire body trembled violently. He was very clear about the state of his soul. At this moment, Duque had almost stopped pouring mana into him. Compared to Duque's boundless, ocean-like mana, Khadgar's capacity was far too small. Master, have I disappointed you? No, I should say that I was too impatient for success. Then, Duque let go of his hand and fell into a long silence. Using the elemental emissary to help him share the burden of becoming a demigod by relying on multiple elemental domains seemed to be stuck. Everything must be divided into primary and secondary. Without a core, there would be no branches. As the foundation of magic, the existence of the Arcana School was absolutely necessary. Similarly, the Arcana School's elemental envoys were also necessary. Duque repeatedly searched through his mind. Apart from Khadgar, Duque could not think of anyone else who could become an Arcana Technique elemental core. Arcana techniques were the foundation and the most versatile of them all. A brainless and untalented fellow would never be able to shoulder such a heavy responsibility. The air was silent. Suddenly, Khadgar moved. He slowly knelt down. His movements seemed to be in slow motion, and every detail was filled with reverence. My lord, I feel that the limits of my soul shouldn't stop here. I think I should have a greater possibility. If you have any other methods, Master, I am willing to give it a try. Even if my soul is annihilated, I will not hesitate. Khadgar gritted his teeth, a resolute expression on his face. It was almost the expression of a martyr. The surrounding elemental emissaries originally had the mentality of watching the ceremony, but at this moment, their expressions completely changed. There were no whispers, no whispers. The air was filled with a fanatical and focused aura. Duque took a deep breath and raised his head. After muttering to himself for a few seconds, he lowered his head and looked at Khadgar. Khadgar, did you know? I once traveled through time and space and went to the ancient war 10,000 years ago. I've heard of it. At that time, I borrowed the power of the Time King, Nozdormu, to peek into Azeroth's past and future. At the same time, I also saw you in a different timeline. Being able to reverse the flow of time and enter a different parallel space sounded like a fantasy. As a pursuer of magic, an explorer of the source of magic, and an official disciple of the Mediv, Khadgar's understanding of time and space far surpassed that of others. Suddenly, Khadgar smiled bitterly, and an expression appeared on his face as if he was about to cry. Is the Khadgar in a different timeline more useful than me? Not just useful, but incomparably glorious. This will be a long story. Are you willing to listen? Khadgar. Khadgar nodded solemnly. Together. Since the beginning of the Dark Portal. Duque's voice became ethereal and illusory. At the same time, a thought wave entered Khadgar's soul. This was a video created by the system Elf using a full 3D image. After it was slightly blurred, it felt exactly the same as when Duque peeked into the river of time. Khadgar was deeply immersed in this seemingly illusory image that was connected to his fate. It was as if another part of his life had been highly condensed, and Khadgar was soon unable to differentiate which part was his true memories, and which part was what Duque had shown him, which part was his fate in the other world of balance. It was not just a look. Khadgar was completely immersed in it. He could clearly understand why he had made this decision. In the time it took for a spark to fly off a flint, what kind of emotions and thoughts did he have to make each and every decision? In this world without Duke Marcus, that's right. Everything had changed. In that world, it was Khadgar, Garona, and Lothar who had raided Karazhan. It was also him who had unfortunately been hit by Mediva's spell, causing him to have white hair and wrinkled skin at a young age. It was also him who had killed Sargeras. Unfortunately, from that moment on, he had also become the murderer of his teacher, the savior of a nameless world. He remembered every detail of his immersion in the study of portal magic. He clearly remembered that the dark portal had opened again, and the orcs had begun to attack the watchtower. How the orcs had used simple weapons to destroy the human infantrymen, smashing their helmets to death, and cutting off their shields and arms. He also, personally, decided that in order to completely stop Nuzul's evil plan, he would lead a coalition of humans, dwarves, and elves together with Turalian, Daneth Trollbane, Aurelia, and Kudrin on an expedition to the Draenor world in an attempt to hunt down Nuzul. In the end, in the final battle of Draenor, Ricard ushered in that fateful explosion. He could still remember that his mouth was wide open, and he screamed silently. But he had to do everything he could to stop this terrifying explosion. Such a huge amount of energy. It was like a spreading flame on the plains, running wildly through his body, burning his magic circuits, and making it almost unbearable for his senses. Then, everything returned to silence. Soon, he turned from a participant to a third-person spectator. He, Khadgar, was regarded as one of the 5 heroes of the Dark Portal, and a statue was erected in the King's Valley in Stormwind City. I am a hero. Chapter 1299. A piece of history that seemed to come from another world stirred up all of Khadgar's memories that had been sealed away for a long time. In the past, he had many dreams as a youth. He dreamed of being a great hero who saved the world, dreamed of becoming the greatest mage, and left his name in history. His parents had sent him to the Dalajan to receive training, and this was what they had taught him. When his innate talent had been activated and he had become a disciple of Medivh, this was also what he had longed for. Goals were different from dreams. Goals could be achieved through hard work and time. But dreams were loftier and more distant. All of a sudden, he was told that in the other world of Azeroth, he was a hero. All of a sudden, all of his dreams, all of his vanity, and even the occasional hollow feeling in his chest were filled in an instant. The feelings that had been dormant in his soul for a long time seemed to have been awakened. So, I can also be this strong, and I can be so worshipped? This feeling was truly wonderful, but in the next moment, Khadgar was startled awake. Was this hero still him? Did the things that happened in the parallel world have anything to do with the main timeline that he was currently in? Khadgar's head suddenly jerked backwards, and his entire body arched backwards. Perhaps in that world, he was like the main character in all the legends of heroes, the gathering point of the world. But it was precisely this feeling of reality that brought him a new and dangerous experience that made him feel a little unreal. As Duque's thoughts stopped, Khadgar found that his senses had returned to normal. He panted heavily. This was a habit of his. Spirit bodies did not need to breathe. Khadgar began to carefully distinguish between what was real and what was not. Duque did not say anything, nor did he try to remind or force Khadgar to do anything. In Duque's imagination, not many people would be able to withstand such an impact. In particular, the psychological difference was too great. How many people would be able to withstand suddenly knowing that they could actually be amazing after living such a terrible life for 20 years? From Duque's perspective, this was like opening Pandora's box. It could release many terrifying things, such as the most negative emotions. But don't forget that the final item in Pandora's box was hope. Therefore, Duque wanted to take a gamble no matter what. He wanted to see if Khadgar, the most powerful great mage in history, lived up to his reputation. It had nothing to do with one's ability to comprehend magic. There were too many talented people in this world, but how many of them could become successful in the end? Apart from talent, success depended more on willpower. Khadgar's willpower had always been strong. Oh! Khadgar panted heavily. Can I see it again? In fact, can I see my future self in that world? Sure, Duque replied calmly as he once again sent over the image created by the system elf. Khadgar closed his eyes and slowly relaxed his senses, allowing the large number of images that invaded his sea of consciousness to gradually calm down, until it became as smooth as watching a movie. Scene after scene flashed before his eyes. Khadgar was once again immersed in that virtual me from another world. In that real illusory world, he opened his eyes and took a deep breath. Now he was standing in a memory that belonged only to him. He was standing in a small world with himself as the center. His body was surging with the energy of that world, and what he felt was something that he could not have felt in his 20 years as a soul. This was very fresh and very heavy, and it allowed him to see things that he could not have seen before. That's right. In that world, he was the hero. He was the leader. At the same time, he had to bear many things that he did not need to bear in the main storyline world. Almost every choice of a high-ranking person was accompanied by pain and sacrifice. There was nothing that could be achieved without paying a price, and there was no war that did not involve death. In this world, he had been a miserable low-ranked mage when he was alive. After choosing to preserve his soul, he only needed to fulfill his duty as a steward. He could push all the dangers to Duque and be his own librarian, roaming in the sea of books and immersing himself in magic experiments. In that parallel world, he was the most important magic consultant of the Alliance, as well as an important leader of the Alliance. Every speculation and decision regarding the realm of mystery was incomparably heavy. It had to be said that Khadgar's heart was in a mess, and he was even feeling bitter. But at this time, Khadgar saw something else. It was something that Duque had intentionally or unintentionally let him see. Sometimes, without comparison, there would be no harm. Khadgar saw that under Duque's leadership, the first and second Dark Portal ended in 2 years. In his own world, it had taken 6 years. In this world, Duque had vigorously developed technology and economy, turning the tide many times. In the field of conventional warfare, the Alliance had almost completely suppressed the enemy. On his side, the Lordaeron kingdom had been destroyed, and there was also Alterac, Rapids Castle, Kuel Salis. Almost all of Lordaeron had been destroyed. Then, Gloom City had risen, and the Sin Dorii kingdom had sided with the Horde. Only when they were placed side by side could Khadgar truly understand just how great the difference between the two worlds was. Khadgar was in a mess, and his mind seemed to have turned to mush. He did not realize that while his thoughts were in chaos, the other 5 elemental emissaries were watching in shock as Khadgar's soul strength increased exponentially. This is... Thaddeus' face was filled with disbelief. Only a soul that has been tested is the strongest soul. Alonso sighed. Duque did not disturb Khadgar. Dooku was throwing caution to the wind, completely throwing caution to the wind. He really did not know how telling Khadgar the truth would affect this steward of Karazhan, who had loyally watched over him for 22 years. He could only gamble. Khadgar's breathing became rapid. Finally, after 2 minutes, he seemed to have calmed down. Duque asked in a low voice, "Khadgar, is it a pity? Is it resentment? Perhaps the original you could have done better." Khadgar raised his head and smiled. As expected, the work of a bronze dragon is difficult for humans to accept. When I saw how valiant I was in the other world, I was a bit confused as to which one was the real me. Duque said, "Have you thought it through?" "I have. The me in this world is me, and the me in the other world is also me. Since the me in the other world can do it, I think I can do it well in my own world." At this point, Khadgar revealed a mysterious smile. "I know what you are worried about, my lord. I want to say that your worries are unnecessary." Unnecessary? Just like how you had countless chances to become the emperor, but you gave up on it. My reason is similar. The world is about to be destroyed by demons, so I don't care who is going to be the hero. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.